Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was halfway through my private pilot training when it happened. My name's Ryan, and at the time, I was flying a rented Cessna 172 out of a small airport near Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Nothing fancy, just your standard training aircraft, no fancy instruments or anything like that. I'd done a handful of solo flights by then, mostly in clear weather, learning how to handle the plane and radio calls. This flight started like any other. Clear blue sky, visibility good, light breeze from the southeast. The plan was simple. Head north for about 40 miles, circle over a small town, then turn back. My instructor had given me a pretty straightforward route to practice navigation, and I was feeling confident. About 20 minutes into the flight, as I was cruising at 3,000 feet, the radio crackled to life with the tower's voice. Cessna N1245. Radar contact. Turn left heading 330 to avoid restricted airspace. Maintain altitude. I flipped the switch, acknowledged the instruction, and began a gentle left turn. But here's the weird part. When I looked out the windshield, I saw nothing but open sky in front of me. No clouds, no other aircraft, no landmarks, just a clear blue canvas stretching out endlessly. At first, I figured maybe the restricted airspace was at a higher altitude or just out of view, so I kept the turn smooth and scanned around. The horizon looked normal, the ground far below green and patchy with fields, roads, and rivers, but no sign of anything that would explain the warning. Then I tried to reach the tower again to confirm, but my radio crackled with static. No response. I tried switching frequencies, turning the volume up, fiddling with the knobs. Nothing. Just that harsh white noise. The radio silence lasted for maybe a minute, though it felt longer. I stared at the dials, then back outside, checking my compass and GPS. Everything else seemed normal. The plane was steady, altitude holding at 3,000 feet, airspeed steady at 90 knots. I tried the radio again, calling Cedar Rapids Tower. This is Cessna N12345. Do you copy? Static. My heart started to beat a little faster. I was alone up there, and I couldn't hear a single voice from the ground. No chatter on the frequencies I knew. Just nothing. I looked out again, and this time I noticed something else. The sky near the horizon was just off. Not cloudy, but like the air itself was shimmering, kind of like a heat haze on a summer road. The colors were muted, like the whole world was filtered through a faded lens. I glanced down at the GPS map. My position was where it should be, but the landscape below looked wrong. The roads didn't line up with what I recognized from before, and some rivers were missing entirely. It was like the map was glitching. That's when I remembered the restricted airspace warning. I looked back up, hoping to spot something, any sign of the airspace boundaries. Nothing but that endless blue sky stretching in every direction. I was starting to feel a little uneasy, but I told myself it was probably a glitch on the radio or a mistake in the air traffic control system. Maybe some equipment was down, or the tower was handling other traffic. After a few minutes, the radio crackled again, this time with a voice I didn't recognize. It wasn't the normal clear tower voice, it was distant, like it was coming through a bad connection, almost underwater. Cessna N12345, you are clear to resume course. Proceed as planned. I replied immediately, acknowledging the instruction, relieved to hear something. As I turned the plane back toward my original heading, the weird haze on the horizon faded, and the landscape below snapped back to normal. Roads lined up, rivers returned, colors popped back in. I checked the radio again. The static was gone and the usual chatter was back. The tower's voice sounded normal, giving me routine updates. But even after everything looked normal again, something didn't sit right. The whole thing, losing contact, the shimmering sky, the mismatched map, felt like I'd stepped into something else for a few minutes. I finished the flight, landing without incident, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched, or maybe like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, even if only for a moment. I talked about it later with my instructor and a couple other pilots, They said maybe it was just a momentary glitch or atmospheric interference, maybe solar activity or something, but none of them had seen anything like what I described. To this day, I'm not sure what really happened up there. It was just a short flight, just a few minutes of strange silence and strange sights. But it's stuck with me. Sometimes when I look at the sky, I wonder if I glimpsed something that's usually hidden, something that exists just outside what we can see or understand. The night was unusually still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, making every small sound feel sharp. I was driving home late on the highway that runs past the old missile test site out near Fort St. George. It's a stretch of road I've taken 1,000 times, mostly empty, just a few trucks now and then, no houses nearby. The kind of place you don't expect anything weird to happen. I was heading back from a late shift at the factory, thinking about the weekend. My name's Mark, by the way. I live in a small town just over the ridge. Nothing fancy, just quiet enough to keep your head down and your worries low. I like that. Driving that stretch is usually boring, especially at night. The highway there is flanked by those rolling fields and patches of scrub, with the test site fenced off a few hundred yards from the road. It's been shut down for decades now, but the old radar dishes and concrete bunkers are still visible if you know where to look. I never paid much attention to it, just part of the background noise, like the flickering highway signs or the buzz of power lines overhead. That night, I was about halfway through the stretch, maybe 10 miles past the last gas station, when it happened. I was going around a slight curve, headlights cutting through the darkness, when my windshield suddenly lit up with this green glow. It was bright, like someone had turned on a huge neon sign right in front of me. The light washed over the entire dashboard and even bounced off the side mirrors. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, heart pounding, and glanced up. But when I looked out, the sky was empty. No headlights, no airplanes, no flashing lights anywhere. Just black with a scattering of stars and the faint orange glow from the distant town. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe something on my windshield caught the light, like a reflection from a street lamp or a truck's taillights behind me. But there was nothing. The road behind was empty, silent, except for the low hum of my engine cooling down after I'd stopped. I tried to shake it off and started driving again, slower this time. The green light hadn't lasted more than a second, but it felt like I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to be there. I kept scanning the sky, waiting for any sign of what had lit up the windshield, but there was nothing. About a mile down the road, I noticed the air seemed different. The usual night smells, the grass, the dust, felt muted, almost sterile. It was hard to explain, but it felt like I was passing through a bubble where everything was slightly off. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but my eyes kept drifting to the trees along the roadside. They looked normal, but there was this odd stillness about them, like they were frozen or waiting for something. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement, something dark slipping between the trees, just beyond where the headlights reached. I blinked, and it was gone. I checked the mirrors, no cars or figures behind me. I figured it was just a deer or some animal, so I kept going. But that feeling didn't leave. My skin was crawling, and I found myself gripping the wheel tighter, my eyes darting around like I was waiting for something else to show up. The highway bends again near the entrance to the missile test site where the old gate still stands, rusty and overgrown with vines. I slowed to a stop beside it, partly because the sudden silence made me nervous, and partly because I wanted to check my phone. No signal, of course. That area's a dead zone. That's when I noticed something else, the radio static. Normally, my car radio would pick up some faint stations, maybe the local news or late-night talk shows. But the static was louder than usual, almost like white noise, but with a strange rhythm. I fiddled with the dial, trying different stations. Nothing but static. No music, no voices, just that eerie buzzing. I turned the radio off and sat there for a minute, trying to collect myself. Then I saw it. A faint glow coming from the far side of the test site, beyond the fence. It wasn't a light like from a flashlight or a car. It was low to the ground, a steady pale green that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. I stared at it for a while, wondering if I was imagining things. The light stayed the same, steady and unnatural. It didn't move, didn't flicker or change color. I got out of the car, feeling the cold night air hit me hard. The usual sounds of night were missing. No crickets, no rustling leaves. Even my footsteps on the gravel sounded too loud. I walked toward the fence, eyes fixed on the glow. It didn't seem to come from any equipment or building, just that patch of ground. I crouched down, trying to see what was making the light. But the ground looked normal. Dry dirt, some scattered leaves, nothing unusual. That's when I noticed the temperature drop. Not a breeze, but a sudden chill that made my breath visible. My skin prickled and my hands went numb. I wanted to back away, but something held me there. Then, without warning, the light blinked out. Just vanished. The night snapped back to normal. The stars reappeared, the temperature rose a bit, and the usual night sounds returned. I stood there for a second, looking around, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I went back to my car, shut the door, and locked it. The radio was still off, and my phone still showed no signal. I started driving again, faster this time, eager to leave that place behind. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. I thought I saw something standing near the fence, just a silhouette, tall and thin, but every time I blinked, it disappeared. By the time I reached the edge of town, the radio came back to life. My phone started picking up bars again. The green light was gone. The silence, the chill, the strange glow, all like a bad dream. I didn't tell anyone for a while. I wasn't sure what I'd seen or if I'd even seen anything at all. But the whole thing stayed with me. The sudden green flash, the pulsing light on the ground, the silence that felt too quiet. Sometimes when I drive that way at night, I get this feeling like the place is watching, waiting. And every once in a while, when the wind is just right, I swear I hear a low hum in the distance, like the echo of something that shouldn't be there. We were about halfway through the trail, maybe 2 hours in, when it started. It was my friends, Josh, Mia, and me, out for a late-night hike up on Mount Helix, the ridge just east of town. We'd planned it mostly because it was spring break and we wanted to get away from the usual noise. The weather was clear, no clouds, and the air was crisp but not cold, the kind of night that feels quiet and empty. We were moving steady, headlamps slicing through the darkness, stepping over roots and rocks. The path curves around the ridge and offers this great view of the city lights below. It always feels like the world ends there, the glow of streets and buildings fading into the hills. We paused for a water break and just looked out over the valley. It was peaceful, except for a low hum. At first, I thought it was just the usual night sounds, insects, wind brushing through the pine needles. But then the hum got louder and sharper. It was definitely mechanical. Josh stopped and tilted his head. "That sounds like a jet engine," he said. Mia nodded, scanning the sky with her flashlight. "Weird to hear one out here, though. I thought the nearest airport was miles away." We looked up, expecting to see a plane passing over, but the sky was empty. No lights, no moving shapes, nothing. The sound stayed exactly the same, right above us, steady and loud. It didn't shift or get louder or softer. It was like a jet engine idling in place, hanging silently in the air. We kept walking, but the sound stayed with us. We tried joking about it at first, calling it a secret military jet or some experimental plane, but there was no fear, just confusion. I looked around. No lights on the ridge, no signs of anything unusual. The forest was still, the usual night noises gone under that constant mechanical roar. Then Mia stopped suddenly, shining her light toward a cluster of trees about 50 feet off the path. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. We all did. It was a faint rustling, like branches scraping together, but it didn't sound natural. No animals that I know make that kind of noise. Josh pulled out his phone to check for signal. No bars. We paused, trying to listen, but the jet sound drowned everything out. Then, all at once, it cut off. 1 second, the engine noise was there, steady, unchanging. Then silence, just like someone flipped a switch. The sudden quiet was more intense than the noise had been. Mia blinked, looking at the empty sky, then back down the trail. "That was weird." Josh rubbed his neck. "Yeah, it's like it was never there." We kept going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd missed something. The air felt heavier, and Baxter... Wait, no, Baxter's not with us. Just me and the two of them. Sorry, I was thinking about my dog back home. Anyway, the silence made everything else louder. Our footsteps, the sound of breath, even the breeze that rustled the leaves. I noticed that the trees around us looked different too, like the bark was a little lighter than I remembered, almost bleached. We walked in silence for another 10 minutes, but then the trail seemed off, like we weren't on the path anymore. I swear I saw a bend we hadn't passed before, but we all agreed we'd been on the same trail the whole time. The GPS on Josh's phone was dead, no signal at all. Mia stopped, shining her light around. Guys, I don't like this. The trail opened into a small clearing surrounded by trees, and in the center was something we didn't expect. 3 tall, thin poles stuck into the ground, each about 10 feet high with little lights on top. The lights were dim and pale blue, like tiny stars, but when we got closer, they didn't blink or glow naturally. They seemed almost fake, like plastic or glass. None of us remembered seeing them before. Josh touched one of the poles, and it was cold, colder than it should have been for a clear spring night. Mia backed away, uneasy. Why would someone leave that here? Before we could answer, the air shifted again. The wind picked up suddenly, even though it had been still moments before, and the blue lights on the poles flickered. Then the noise started again, the same jet engine sound, but this time it wasn't above us. It felt like it was coming from inside the clearing. We looked up. The stars above were gone. The sky was completely black, like a void, even though it was a clear night before. We turned our headlamps on full blast, but the light didn't reach past the clearing's edge. It was like the darkness was swallowing it up. The engine noise grew louder, but it wasn't just a sound anymore. The ground vibrated faintly beneath our boots. The pole's lights flickered faster, pulsing like a heartbeat. I don't know what made me do it, but I stepped forward, toward the center of the clearing. The hairs on my arms stood up. I felt cold and hot at the same time, like I was caught in some strange energy field. Suddenly, everything stopped again. The sound, the lights, the vibration. The stars blinked back into the sky. The wind died down. The poles were gone. We all looked at each other, wide-eyed. There was nothing in the clearing now except dirt and scattered pine needles, like the poles had never been there. Mia broke the silence. Did we imagine it? Josh pulled out his phone again. Still no signal. We hurried back the way we came, eyes scanning the trees for any sign we were being followed, but the trail seemed normal again. The bend we'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by familiar markers. When we got back to the parking lot, it was nearly 6 a.m. The city was waking up, streetlights flickering off as dawn brightened the sky. I checked the time on my watch, but it felt wrong. The watch was 6 minutes ahead of my phone's clock, which itself was a minute off from Mia's. None of us remembered the time feeling off during the hike, but now it didn't add up. The whole trip had felt like 3 hours, but the clock said almost 4. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Something was off, and none of us knew what to say. I'm still trying to figure it out. The noise, the poles, the sky going black, none of it makes sense. It's like the night did something to us, something that stayed with us even after we were back in the normal world. I keep thinking about that silence after the noise cut out, how it was heavier than anything I've ever heard. And sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I swear I hear that distant drone again. But when I look outside, the sky is just full of stars, exactly as it should be. It was around 4 a.m. when I decided to take Baxter out for his usual early morning walk. I live on the edge of town, just where the houses start to thin out and the streetlights give way to darkness. The sky was clear, no moon, just a handful of stars glimmering faintly above the rooftops. The air had that cold, still feeling of early spring, sharp but not bitter. Baxter was restless that morning, more energetic than usual, tugging at the leash with his usual mix of excitement and urgency. I thought a quick walk before sunrise would help burn off some of his energy. So I grabbed his leash, put on my jacket, and stepped out the front door. The neighborhood was silent except for the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and the faint sound of Baxter's nails clicking on the pavement. The houses were dark, all curtains drawn. I felt the usual calm that comes with walking in the pre-dawn hours, that quiet solitude before the day starts. We headed down the street, and Baxter was sniffing around, pulling me toward the small patch of trees at the end of the cul-de-sac. As we got closer, I noticed something strange in the sky. 3 lights, very bright, arranged in a perfect triangle. They weren't blinking or moving, just hanging there, fixed and steady. The lights were white, but not harsh like headlights or street lamps. They had a soft glow, almost like they were glowing from within. I stopped walking and looked up. Baxter froze next to me, his body rigid, ears flat against his head. He trembled a little, like he was scared, but didn't want to run. That's when the feeling hit me, like something was wrong, like the air itself had thickened. I glanced around, expecting maybe to see someone else outside or a car driving by, but the street was empty and still. No sound except for the faint rustle of leaves in a slight breeze. The triangle of lights stayed there, perfectly still. I reached out to scratch Baxter's head, trying to calm him, but he didn't move. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on the lights, wide and unblinking. I tried to shake off the weird feeling creeping up my spine. Maybe it was just a weird reflection, or some new drone, or a radio tower. I squinted, trying to make out anything behind the lights, but the sky was just black. After what felt like several minutes, the lights began to fade. Not slowly, but like someone turned down a dimmer switch. They got weaker and weaker until they disappeared completely, leaving only the stars behind. Baxter stayed frozen for a few seconds after the lights vanished, then finally relaxed. I unclenched my fingers on the leash and gave him a gentle squeeze. He looked up at me, confused, like he couldn't understand what just happened. I kept walking after that, but the street felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the world was holding its breath. Baxter stayed close, looking around like he was on alert. I checked my phone for the time. It was still just after 4:10 a.m. When we got back to the house, I opened the door and looked back out the window. The sky was empty now, normal. I told myself I'd imagined it all, but Baxter's behavior didn't add up. I haven't told anyone about it, not really. People say you should call the cops or the news if you see weird lights, but this wasn't like that. It was quieter, stranger. I'm still trying to figure out what it was, but I don't have answers. Just a dog that wouldn't move, and 3 lights in a perfect triangle hanging silently above a neighborhood that wasn't ready to wake up yet. I was about halfway through Nevada when it happened. Just past Tonopah, headed east on 6 toward Ely. Nothing but desert and sagebrush and that kind of empty silence that gets into your head after a few hours. I'd left Bishop that morning, took my time through the hills, stopped at a couple of ghost towns along the way. I wasn't in a rush, just me, my Tacoma, and the open road. It was late, not quite midnight yet. The air was still warm, probably mid-70s, but dry like paper. I had the windows cracked and a podcast going low on the stereo, mostly to keep myself awake. There aren't many cars on that stretch after dark. None, really. I hadn't passed anyone in either direction for at least 45 minutes. I was watching the road like usual when I noticed a red light way off to my left. Just a single point, steady. My first thought was that it was a tower, maybe a radio repeater or some weather station out in the hills. It didn't flash or move, just glowed a dull red like the ones you see blinking on cell towers. But the thing is, there's nothing out there. No towns, no stations, nothing but BLM land and rock. I even slowed down a little, leaned over the wheel, trying to make out the shape of a tower. Couldn't see one. Just that red light, hovering low, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the desert floor. I kept an eye on it as I drove. It didn't get closer or farther away. Just stayed level with me, same angle. I figured it must be on a ridge or something, and I was just tracking with it as the road curved. Then it rose. Not fast, but smooth. Straight up. Like a balloon maybe, or a drone, but perfectly vertical. I watched it go up, maybe a couple 100 feet, then it blinked out. Gone. No fade, no dimming. Just gone. I pulled over without really thinking. Gravel crunched under the tires as I rolled onto the shoulder, left the engine running. Sat there with both hands on the wheel, staring out at the black. I didn't feel scared exactly, just off, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I turned off the podcast, rolled down both front windows all the way, just sat in the dark for a minute, listening. Nothing. No wind, no bugs, no distant cars, just silence and heat. I don't know why I got out, but I did. Grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped onto the shoulder. The sky was clear, full of stars. I could see the Milky Way smeared across it like paint. I pointed the flashlight out toward where I'd seen the red light. Nothing but scrub and open flats, maybe some low hills way out. The beam didn't reach far. I didn't go far either. Maybe 10 feet from the truck. It felt wrong to wander out there, like the edge of a pool you don't want to fall into. I just stood there for a bit, trying to shake the weird feeling crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed the static. Not in the air, on the radio. I hadn't touched the dial, but the stereo had gone fuzzy, like it was caught between two stations. Low white noise, barely audible under the hum of the truck's engine. I reached in and turned it off completely. Something about the quiet was worse than the static. I decided to keep moving. Got back in, locked the doors without meaning to, and pulled back onto the road. Told myself it was probably a drone. Some military test. There's a ton of airspace out there used for that stuff. But I couldn't shake the way it moved, how steady it was, how it disappeared. About 10 minutes later, I saw it again. Not to the side this time, straight ahead. A faint red light, low, just above the horizon. It wasn't flashing, it didn't bob like a plane. Just sat there, dead center. At first I thought it might be a brake light from another car cresting a hill, but the road was flat and I never got closer. I drove another mile, still there, unmoving. I slowed to 40, then 30. Still the same size, same position. I even rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was just a reflection or something stuck on the windshield. Then it split in two. The single red light became two, side by side, maybe 50 feet apart, both just hovering. Still no blinking, no movement. I came to a complete stop in the middle of the highway, hazard lights clicking, and watched. After a few seconds, the two lights began to move, not toward me, not away, just upward again, together, same speed, same direction. They rose in sync until they were almost level with the stars. Then they blinked out, one after the other. I sat there with my foot on the brake, mouth dry, trying to understand what I'd just seen. No explanation came. No sound. No wind. Nothing. I didn't stop again. I drove the rest of the way to Ely in a kind of daze, white-knuckled on the wheel, constantly checking the rearview mirror. I kept the radio off, kept the windows up. The stars seemed brighter than usual, too bright. The shadows on the road looked wrong, stretched, like the moonlight was bending somehow. I got into town just before 2 a.m., checked into a little motel off the main drag. The girl at the desk asked if I needed anything, and I must have looked off because she asked if I was okay. I just told her I was tired. That night in the motel, I left the curtains open. Didn't sleep much. I kept thinking I'd see those lights again, hovering out past the parking lot, rising above the hills behind the town, but they never came back. It started with the lights flickering, just once. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out a coffee mug when everything blinked off, came back on, and then went completely dark. It wasn't stormy, no wind, no reason for it. Just a calm, clear night. Early March, around 9:15 p.m. The temperature had dipped, but the sky was clean and dry. I live about 10 miles outside of Fairview, up in eastern Tennessee. The kind of place where houses are spread out and you lose cell signal if you walk too far from the porch. We're on well water, propane heat, no natural gas lines out here. The power cuts out sometimes, a blown transformer, or some raccoon chewing something it shouldn't. So at first I didn't think much of it. I stood there in the dark, waiting to see if it was just a quick blip or something longer. Then, exactly 12 seconds later, everything came back on. The fridge kicked in with that little clunk, the porch light outside glowed through the window, and the baseboard heater started humming again. I looked over at the microwave. It was blinking like always when the power goes out. 12. Same with the stove clock. My first thought was to check the breaker box, but everything looked fine. I reset the clocks without thinking much about it and went to let the dog out. A few minutes later, I passed the old wall clock in the hallway. This weird antique one my grandfather gave me with actual gears and a wind-up key. I hadn't touched it in months, but it was ticking. Not only that, it said 9:34. I looked at my phone again. 9:30. I figured I'd just forgotten to adjust it after the last time the power went out. It's always a little off. Never perfect. But then I walked into the bedroom and saw the battery-powered alarm clock on my nightstand. One of those basic analog ones with the little red hand. And it also said 9:34. The one in the den? Same. I've got 6 clocks in this house that aren't digital. Every single one of them was exactly 4 minutes fast. Not 3, not 5. 4 on the dot. I stood there in the hallway for a minute watching the second hand on the old wall clock. It was moving steady. No skips, no lag, just normal ticking. But I couldn't figure out how they all ended up synced to the exact same wrong time. I went outside partly to get some air and partly just to shake the weird feeling. My dog Murphy was still out there, standing stiff near the edge of the yard, ears pointed toward the tree line. He wasn't barking, just watching. Just watching. I called him a couple times, but he didn't come right away, which was unusual. He finally jogged back, real slow, like he wasn't totally sure it was safe. I crouched down to pet him and noticed the air felt flat, still, even for out here. No night insects, no rustling in the woods, just absolute quiet. I went back inside and poured myself a little bourbon. Sat down in the den, turned on the TV just to have some noise. Local news was wrapping up. They didn't mention any outages. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, I heard a low hum coming from the back of the house, almost like a generator, but muffled. I don't have a generator. My nearest neighbor is about a mile away, and even if they had one running, I wouldn't hear it from inside. I walked down the hall, and as I passed the guest bedroom, I heard it clearer. A pulsing sound, low and slow, like someone revving a truck far away and letting the engine wind down, then revving again. But it was too even, too mechanical, not natural. I opened the blinds. Nothing outside. The porch motion light didn't trigger. I flipped the switch and stepped onto the back steps. The sound stopped instantly. I stood there, waiting. It didn't start up again. The yard looked normal, same scraggly grass, same busted bird feeder swinging on the branch near the shed, but the woods felt wrong. It's hard to explain. Just off, like I was being watched. I went back in, locked the door behind me. I checked the clocks again, still 4 minutes fast. I tried to record a video on my phone at FLEC-A, comparing the microwave clock to the analog one on the wall. But right as I started filming, my phone shut off. Full battery, no warning, just powered down. Wouldn't turn back on until I plugged it into the charger. That's when I noticed the living room light was pulsing. Not flickering, not dimming, pulsing, like a slow heartbeat. Bright, dim in a rhythm. I turned it off at the switch. The hum started again. Same pulsing tone, in sync with the light, like they were connected somehow. I just sat there for a while, on the edge of the couch, staring at the blank TV. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. I don't have a second floor. The sound came from directly above the den. 5 or 6 distinct steps, slow and heavy, like someone walking across a wood floor. I stood up, heart racing, and just listened. The ceiling was silent now, but the hum was still going. I turned off everything. Lights, TV, even the fridge, unplugged it. I just stood there in the dark, listening. The hum stopped again. No more footsteps. No more pulsing. I stood in my yard till nearly 1 in the morning with a flashlight and didn't see or hear anything else. When I came back in, all the clocks still showed 4 minutes ahead of the time on my phone. The next morning, I drove into town. The power company didn't show any outages in the area. None of my neighbors, at least the ones I talked to, had lost power, and nobody else had any clocks that jumped. A week later, I took the wall clock down and removed the back cover. I thought maybe it was some kind of mechanical issue, a jam, a spring unwinding too fast, but the gears were fine. The mechanism was clean. It hadn't been wound in months. It shouldn't have been ticking at all. I let it run. It kept perfect time, 4 minutes ahead. Always. Sometimes I hear the hum again, just faint, far off, only at night. Murphy hears it too. He'll sit by the back door, staring out into the trees, not barking, just listening. The clocks never jumped again, but they've never gone back either. Always 4 minutes fast, always ticking. I was about 10 miles southeast of Groom Lake when it happened. Not on the base, obviously. I'm not that reckless. but on BLM land outside the perimeter where you can hike out and camp without bothering anyone. This was last fall, mid-October. Dry, no wind, mid-40s at night. Perfect conditions for a time lapse. I'd driven up from Alamo around sunset in my old Tacoma, took the dirt trail off Mailbox Road, and parked near a rocky outcrop that gave a decent view of the western horizon. It's remote out there. You don't see headlights after dark, no towers, no fences, just sagebrush, gravel, and empty sky. I set up my gear maybe 50 yards from the truck. Sony A7 on a slider rig pointed northwest with an intervalometer set to shoot one frame every 10 seconds. I had a portable battery pack hooked up, enough juice to run all night. I was mainly aiming to catch the Milky Way rotation over the ridgeline, maybe a few satellites or meteors if I was lucky. Around 8:45, the stars started popping out. Crystal clear. No planes, no noise. Just the faint chirping of crickets and the click of my shutter every few seconds. I laid out on my sleeping pad next to the tripod, staring up, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing weird for a while. The Big Dipper was high, Mars was low over the hills, Orion starting to climb up behind me. Then, sometime after 11, I wasn't checking my watch much, I noticed a single light appear low over the ridge. Not a plane. It didn't blink. Just a steady white dot like a star, except too close and too bright. Maybe the size of Venus on a good night. It rose slowly, maybe 5 degrees above the ridge, and just hovered. I sat up and watched it. The camera kept shooting behind me. I thought maybe it was a drone, except there was no sound. None. Not even a whisper of rotor wash. And I've heard drones before. I fly one for work. They whine, even at a distance. This thing was silent. It hovered for maybe a minute, then it split. Clean. No flare, no burst, just 2 smaller lights peeled off from either side, same brightness, moving out horizontally. One went left, one went right. All 3 held a perfect triangle for a few seconds, equidistant, unmoving. Then the left one started moving north, slow and smooth, while the right one drifted south. The original one stayed put, still no sound. I stood up, grabbed the camera off the rig, and pointed it manually, trying not to shake. The screen showed all 3 lights clear as day. No strobe, no navigation lights. They weren't stars. They weren't planes. The pattern was too rigid. The 2 outside lights curved back in like boomerangs, rejoining the center point one at a time. Not fast, not jerky, just precise. And then the second they touched, the light winked out. Gone. I stood there a full minute, not breathing. Just listening. No wind, no insects. Just the faint tick of the camera still running on the time lapse. I didn't hear a departure, no sonic boom, no fade. It didn't speed away. It just vanished. I kept the camera running another 2 hours. Nothing else showed up. Back in Alamo the next day, I dumped the card onto my laptop. The footage was there, every frame. I played it back at 24 frames per second. For most of the sequence, it was stars, clouds drifting, maybe a shooting star. But at frame 979, the light appears. By frame 985, it splits. Frames 1002 through 1011 show all 3 lights in formation. And then by frame 1027, it's a single light again. Frame 1030, gone. I checked the EXIF data, no exposure glitches, no light leaks, just clean frames. I slowed it down further, frame by frames. The shapes held position between frames, no blur, no trails, just static, perfect dots. Then movement, then gone. I showed it to my coworker Mike, who does drone mapping for ranchers. He leaned in, squinted, and asked where I shot it. When I told him, he didn't say anything. Just handed the laptop back and said, could be heat mirage, which it wasn't. At night, in 40-degree air, the part that sticks with me most, more than the lights even, was the silence. No wind, no animals, not even the crunch of gravel under my boots while I moved. It was like everything had gone still for those 10 minutes. I've gone out since then, same spot, different nights. Set up the rig, watched the sky, never saw it again. It happened last March, around 2:30 in the morning. I'd been out in the backyard running some test shots with my Skywatcher mount and the ASI camera I'd just upgraded to. I live on the edge of town, about 15 minutes west of Missoula, so the light pollution's not too bad, especially after midnight. I usually just shoot galaxies or clusters, nothing fancy. I'm not one of those guys posting stacked RGB composites with hours of exposure. I just like pointing the scope at something and seeing what shows up. That night, I had the scope aimed near Ursa Major, trying to frame M109. Conditions were decent. No moon, minimal haze, just a bit of wind. I was mostly fiddling with focus and dithering settings. The auto-guiding was holding pretty steady, and the camera feed was clean. Around the third frame, I noticed something flicker across the lower right corner of the preview window. Just a brief blip, like a hot pixel, except it moved. I figured maybe it was a satellite. They cut across frames sometimes, leave those diagonal streaks. Nothing unusual. But then it did it again about 10 seconds later from a slightly different angle. I paused the sequence and rewound the buffer. Sure enough, there was something there. A faint point of light, same brightness as maybe a 6th magnitude star, zipping across the field of view. But instead of moving straight across like every other satellite I've seen, this one curved. It started from the lower edge, rose up at maybe a 30-degree angle, then bent right, almost like a hook, and slowed down near the top of the frame before vanishing completely. No fade, no trailing streak, just gone. At first I thought maybe it was a tumbling satellite. Those sometimes flare or flash depending on how the sunlight hits them. But this didn't flash. It didn't rotate. It changed direction. I switched to manual tracking and tried to reacquire it visually, but I couldn't find anything. I checked heavens above on my phone for any satellite passes. Nothing matched. The ISS wasn't scheduled, and none of the known LEO satellites came anywhere near that section of sky at that time. I sat back for a second and looked up with just my eyes. Nothing. Not a plane, not a contrail, not even a blinking dot. The wind had died down completely, and everything felt oddly still. My neighbor's horses across the way weren't moving, not even the usual rustling in the trees. I ran the footage again, zoomed in as much as I could. The object, whatever it was, showed up in 5 frames total. It held the same brightness the entire time. No flicker, no distortion. But the weirdest part was the reversal. Frame 3, it was moving upright. Frame 4, it stalled. Frame 5, it zipped left like a slingshot in reverse, and then disappeared. Satellites don't do that. Planes can't do that. Nothing I know moves like that, not without turning, not without some sign of propulsion. I saved the clip, backed it up, and then just sat there with my coffee going cold in my hand. Around 3:10 a.m., I noticed something else. The scope had started slewing very slightly. Not fast, but off by maybe a few arc minutes per second. I hadn't touched the controls. The hand controller was on the ground next to the tripod. The mount was trying to adjust on its own, even though the target coordinates hadn't changed. I stopped tracking, reset everything, and tried a go-to command. It moved normally at first, then stalled halfway to Vega. Just locked up. No error messages, no beeps, just froze. I powered the mount off and back on. It rebooted fine. No obvious issues. But it left me feeling off, like something had interfered with it. That rig's never glitched before. Not once. I run firmware updates religiously. Never had a freeze like that. I packed up earlier than usual. Something about the air felt wrong. Not cold, just flat. Like the sky had lost its depth. I know how that sounds, but that's the best way I can explain it. The next day, I checked the footage again on my desktop. I tried stabilizing it, enhancing the brightness, slowing it down. Same result every time. A small, steady point of light that shouldn't have been able to change direction the way it did. I posted it on a local astronomy forum, asking if anyone else had seen something weird the night before. No replies. Not even views, which was strange. That board's usually active. Later that week, I showed it to my friend Doug. He's a retired Air Force mechanic who does imaging with an 8-inch reflector. He squinted at it for a while, then leaned back and said, "That's not a bird, not a drone, and not one of ours." He didn't elaborate. That was the only night I've ever caught something like that. But about a month later, something else happened. It was just after 1 a.m., and I wasn't even observing. I was in the garage working on my truck. The scope was folded up in the corner. I'd left the mount plugged in from the night before because I was too tired to tear it down properly. As I was tightening the belt tensioner under the hood, I heard the mount power on by itself. The garage lights were off, but I could see the green glow from the controller screen through the dust cover. It started slewing. Slowly. Quietly. The scope was still locked in place, so it couldn't move far, but the motors were running. I stepped over and shut it off. I didn't sleep much that night. Since then, I haven't seen anything else out of the ordinary. I still take the scope out a few nights a week when it's clear, but I don't leave the mount plugged in, and I stopped using auto-guiding entirely. Just manual now. Sometimes, when I'm out there, lining up a shot or checking the histogram, I'll pause and look up, just with my eyes. Just stars. Just sky. But every once in a while, I get the feeling something's watching back. Like one of those points of light doesn't belong. Like it's waiting to move again. I was locking up Hangar 4 at Fallow Creek Airfield when I first heard it. We're not a busy place. 2 runways, 4 hangars, and mostly hobbyists flying weekend Cessnas. I'd been working maintenance there since I got laid off from Delta in '09. Just me and Ernie most days. He handled fuel, I handled repairs. It was a Wednesday, late September. The air had that kind of stillness it gets after the wind dies down, and the sun was already behind the ridge to the west. No one had flown in or out after 3 that day. The weather was decent, just cool and dry with a little haze, but it wasn't grounded for conditions or anything. People just hadn't shown up. Anyway, I was the last one out. I just finished sealing up a nose strut on Jack Morley's 172, ran the checklist, and started walking toward the hangar's big roll door. That's when I heard it. A low hum, pulsing in and out, kind of like a diesel engine idling underwater. Slow, even, not loud, but deep. You could feel it more than hear it. The kind of sound that sits in your chest. I figured maybe one of the nearby farms was running a generator. They've got old equipment, and sometimes you get weird harmonics bouncing off the hills. But this wasn't coming from the side. It was straight above. I stepped outside onto the tarmac, squinting up through the haze. Nothing. Not a cloud, not a plane, not even birds. Just pale sky turning orange near the horizon. And the second my boots hit the pavement, the sound cut off. No fade, just gone. I stood there for a bit, looking around. No wind, no bugs, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something. I walked a few paces out onto the taxiway, just to make sure it wasn't some acoustic thing with the hangar walls. Still nothing. I even circled back behind the building to check the little shed where we keep the air compressor. Silent. I finished locking up, tried not to think too much about it, and drove home. The next day, Ernie said the security lights had tripped around 1 a.m. Could have been a coyote, he said. But when I checked the feed, the video was blank between 12:57 and 1:04. 7 minutes of pure black. Not static, just absence, like the feed never existed. Our system's old, but it doesn't usually do that. Even if the lights don't pick something up, the infrared works fine. It catches rabbits hopping across the grass. But that stretch was just gone. I mentioned the sound to Ernie. He kind of shrugged it off. Might have been a low pass, he said. Military maybe, they run silent sometimes. But even low passes show up on radar or leave contrails. And nothing that heavy moves without at least some vibration. We would have felt it in the hangars. That night I stayed late again. Didn't mean to. Just lost track of time fixing a wiring fault on the panel of an old Piper Cub. I noticed the light shift. We've got these skylights that turn real dim when the sun sets, and realized it was already past 7. I shut down, walked out, and stood for a second, just listening. Same quiet, same still air. I thought about the hum again and looked up. That's when I noticed the stars. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. There was this patch of sky directly above the airfield, maybe the size of a football field, with no stars at all. Everywhere else was clear, perfect visibility. But that spot? Just black. No shape, no light, nothing you could point to and say, that's something. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. Like looking into a hole where the sky should be. I blinked a bunch, rubbed my eyes, even cleaned my glasses on my shirt. Same thing. Then, just like the night before, I felt the hum again. Not heard, felt, in the middle of my chest. A slow thud like a heartbeat, but lower. And then this weird pressure in my ears, like I was climbing an altitude too fast. Not painful, just that muted pop you get when something's not equalized. I turned and walked straight back to the hangar. The second I stepped under the doorframe, the hum stopped. My ears cleared instantly. I flipped the lights back on, stood there for a few minutes with my arms crossed, trying to convince myself I was tired and imagining things. There was no point staying, so I left. The next morning, Ernie showed up late, said he had to take his dog to the vet. Apparently, she'd been whining all night, pacing the house, wouldn't settle down. I didn't think much of it until he said she kept staring at the sky. Wouldn't stop looking up, he said. Just sat by the back door, growling at nothing. That gave me pause, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to sound nuts. That afternoon, we had a guy named Brent fly in from Henderson. He was picking up some refurbished avionics I'd done for him. He stayed maybe 15 minutes. As he was leaving, he paused and looked up. "You guys doing balloon launches or something?" he asked. I said no. He nodded slowly, still staring at the sky. "Thought I saw something," he said. "Weird shimmer over the ridge, like heat haze but cooler." After he left, I walked out to where he'd parked. Looked up. Same spot, that starless patch, now just a faint shimmer in the air like looking through glass. You'd miss it if you weren't trying. But it was there, a wobble in the atmosphere. That night I stayed until dark again. Brought a thermos and a lawn chair and just sat outside the hangar, watching the sky. Around 8:45, I started to feel the hum again. Same spot, same vibration. But this time it didn't stop. It got a little stronger every minute. Not louder, just denser, like the air itself was thickening. Then the lights along the taxiway flickered. Just once. Then again, the hangar lights cut out completely. Total black. I stood up, heart thudding. I thought maybe the grid was failing. The airfield's on an old line. But then the security floodlight on Hangar 1 flicked on, blazed bright for 3 seconds, then snapped off again. Then nothing. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, the lights came back on all at once. No hum, no flicker, just quiet. I packed up and left. For a while after that, things were normal, or seemed like they were. Then one night, about a week later, I got a call from the airfield's weather station vendor. They do remote monitoring, send us reports once a week. The tech on the phone said our station had registered a pressure dip localized right above our GPS coordinates for about 4 minutes on the previous Wednesday. He said it was probably a sensor fault, but wanted to double check in case we needed to recalibrate. I asked how big the pressure dip was. He paused. Localized drop of 2.1 kilopascals, he said, centered about 300 feet above ground level, like a sudden absence of mass. I didn't say anything, just thanked him and hung up. Since then, I haven't stayed past sunset. I don't fly. I don't look up when I don't have to. I keep my head down and fix what's broken. But every now and then, around dusk, when the light goes flat and the air turns real still, I swear I feel it again. Just faint, just for a second, like something's moving up there, waiting. I was reviewing drone footage from a field survey in the Mojave when I saw it. We'd spent a week out there cataloging desert tortoise habitats around the Amboy Crater area, way off the highway. Heat, dust, and not much else. I was back home in Riverside when I started sorting through the drone files. Just boring flyover stuff, mostly. But I remember pausing at one clip because of how still everything was. No wind, no birds, not even a rabbit crossing the rocks. It was recorded around 6:40 a.m., just as the sun was getting high enough to stretch shadows thin. I was skipping ahead in 5-second jumps when I saw it. A shadow glided across the rocks from left to right, big, perfectly round, smooth as glass. Like a spotlight, except it was pitch black. It moved slow, maybe 10 feet every second, completely silent. There was nothing in the sky, nothing above it. I paused it, scrolled back, played it again. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet wide, sliding across the landscape. It didn't match the sun's angle or shape. It wasn't a drone. I know our shadows, and this wasn't one of them. I checked the GPS timestamp. It was recorded during a solo flight, no other team members nearby. I thought maybe it was a lens issue. I've seen weird flares, even rolling shutter glitches when the sun hits just right. But this wasn't a digital artifact. It actually passed behind a boulder. Part of the shadow disappeared behind the rock, then reappeared on the other side. It was interacting with the terrain. It had depth. I went out to the garage and pulled the drone itself from the case. I checked for scratches, bugs on the lens, anything that might have caused it. Nothing. Ran the footage through another program. Still there. No errors. The next day I called Heather, who'd handled the flight logs. She hadn't noticed anything weird. I didn't mention the shadow. I just asked if she remembered anyone flying over us that morning. She didn't. Airspace was clear, no scheduled passes, and we were too far from any towns or bases to get random traffic. It was just us, tortoises, and sand. That night, I went back to the footage. I started watching the whole clip in real time, and I noticed something else. Right before the shadow enters the frame, the audio picks up a very faint crackling noise, almost like static. Our drone mic's not great, mostly wind and motor whine, but this was something else, like distant radio fuzz, just for a second or two. It cuts out as soon as the shadow's gone. That's when I started to feel a little off about it. 2 days later, I drove back out to the area. Alone. Dumb, maybe, but I had to see it with my own eyes. The GPS tag put the drone right over a dry wash about 3 miles east of the crater. It was mid-morning by the time I parked the truck and hiked out. No clouds, no sound, just heat shimmering above the rocks. I found the exact spot from the footage. Same boulder, same wash. Everything looked normal. I walked the ground where the shadow had moved. Nothing unusual. No burn marks, no impressions, no tracks. But I noticed something strange about the silence. I mean, the desert's never loud, but this was dead. No wind, no bugs, not even the occasional hum of distant planes. It felt like the sound had been turned off. I stayed out there for maybe an hour, mostly pacing, looking for signs, trying to convince myself it had been some weird glitch. Then I heard it, a brief crackle, just off to the south, like someone flipping on a walkie for half a second, then silence again. I called out, nothing. Waited a minute, still nothing. I started walking that way, but after 50 yards I got this tight feeling in my chest, like pressure. No pain, just wrong, like the air was heavier. I turned around and walked back to the truck. Back home, I kept the footage to myself. I didn't know what to do with it. I replayed it maybe 50 times over the next few weeks. I even showed it once to my brother. He used to work with survey drones up north. He squinted at it, scratched his chin, and said, "That's not from your drone," then handed it back without asking questions. A month later, while organizing a new set of clips from a different trip near Barstow, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. It was another early morning flight, same type of terrain, and right at the end of the video, the drone camera stuttered. Not a glitch, but a brief, sudden dip. Then I saw the edge of a round shadow sweep in from the top left. Just a corner of it this time, maybe 5 feet across, but same shape, same movement. It vanished before the drone finished the pass. I checked the logs again. No scheduled air traffic, no other drones. This flight had been on a separate trip over 60 miles from the first one. Different team, different week. I hadn't even noticed until now. I started combing through old footage, stuff from months before. Anything with early morning light. I found 2 more clips, one from Arizona, one from outside Ridgecrest, with strange audio static and sudden camera drops. No visible shadows in those, but the pattern matched. Silent mornings, brief crackles, tiny dips in the gimbal. I never mentioned it in any reports. I didn't want to deal with the questions. This work is how I pay rent. Saying I was chasing weird shadows across the desert wasn't going to fly. But last week, something new happened. We were testing a thermal rig over rocky terrain near Goffs. It was late afternoon, around 4:30, and hot enough to fry skin. I was on site with 2 grad students, and we had just wrapped up. I launched the drone one last time to get an overhead before the light changed too much. Everything was smooth until about 3 minutes in. The video feed cut to black for 2 seconds, then came back. The drone was fine, no errors, still in position. But later, when I reviewed the footage that night, that black frame wasn't blank. It was off. Not pitch black, more like a dome of darkness. A solid circle, again, but this time it filled almost the whole frame. You could make out faint edges of the terrain around it, like the drone had passed under something, even though the flight path didn't dip. It should have been wide open sky. That same faint static buzzed for exactly 1.8 seconds, then gone. I haven't flown since. I told the team it was equipment malfunction that we needed to recalibrate. I still don't know what I'm looking at. It's just shadows, but they move without light. They show up where nothing is, and whatever they are, they're showing up more often. always in the middle of nowhere, always when it's quiet, and always watching from above. I was hiking with my buddy Kevin near Fort Huachuca, down in southern Arizona. This was last March, early spring. The weather was perfect, cool in the shade, warm in the sun. We'd been out a few times that season, but this trail was new to us. It was just outside the restricted zone, technically public land, but pretty remote. Kevin's the type who likes to get close to fences and see what kind of signs he can spot. He doesn't mess with them, just likes the vibe, I guess. We parked off a dirt service road around 10:30 in the morning, hiked in maybe 3 miles before we stopped for lunch. No cell service, which was expected. Kevin had downloaded offline maps, and I had a Garmin for backup. We were sitting on this rocky ridge overlooking a long wash. The land was empty. Just chaparral, low brush, and the occasional mesquite. You could see clear out to the Dragoon Mountains on one side and the base perimeter way off to the other. At some point after lunch, we noticed it had gotten really quiet. No wind, no bugs. That wasn't too weird. It happens sometimes when the sun's high, but the air felt weirdly thick. I don't know how else to say it. Like that moment before a monsoon, only the sky was clear. We were packing up when my Garmin screen went black. Kevin looked up and said, "My phone just died." I thought he meant battery died, but he still had like 80%. He pressed the power button and nothing happened. My Garmin wouldn't respond either. We pulled out our backup phones. Kevin carries an old flip phone for emergencies, and even that was dead. No power, no flicker, no restart logo. Like the batteries were just gone. We stood there for a while, just kind of confused. No electronics were working. We tried our watches, dead. My little pocket flashlight, nothing. Kevin even pulled out his camera, an old Nikon he brings sometimes. Wouldn't turn on. Then we heard this low sound. Not loud, barely audible, but deep. It wasn't wind or a plane. It felt more like pressure than noise. A low hum that came in waves. I asked Kevin if he felt it or heard it, and he just nodded. We didn't move. I don't know why. I think we were both trying to stay calm, like we were waiting for it to stop. It did, maybe 5 or 6 minutes later, just gone. Almost immediately after, Kevin's phone buzzed. Then my Garmin lit up. Everything just came back like normal. We both kind of laughed it off at first, like maybe it was solar interference or something. We checked our phones, time was correct, battery percentage hadn't changed, but there were some new photos in Kevin's gallery. He was the one who noticed. We were standing there looking at his phone, and he said, "I didn't take these." There were 8 photos, all time-stamped between 12:41 and 12:46, which matched the window when everything was off. The first few were just blurry shots of the sky, totally out of focus, angled weird, like the phone had been tilted upward but not pointed directly overhead. Then one showed Kevin. Kind of. His shoulder, part of his neck, like someone was taking a picture from behind him at a downward angle. Then there was a picture of the dirt, just dirt and a bit of my boot. Then one that showed us both, from a distance. It was a wide shot. We were standing maybe 15 feet apart, looking in opposite directions. Kevin was adjusting his backpack, and I had my hands on my hips. It looked like it had been taken from slightly above, like from a hill or something, but there was nothing like that nearby. There were no shadows from whoever or whatever took it. I checked my own phone and saw 3 new photos there too. They were less clear, but the last one was a shot of Kevin walking ahead of me. Only I don't remember that happening. The trail in the picture curved left through a narrow canyon. I swear we never went that way. We stood there going through our galleries trying to piece it together. The timestamps made sense, but the photos didn't. We weren't moving during that time. Neither of us had the phones out. Kevin got really quiet. He zoomed in on one of the sky shots. In the upper left corner, there was a small white smudge. At first, I thought it was lens flare, but it had shape to it. Not sharp, more like an oval, but vertical and just barely off-center. We tried to take pictures of the same patch of sky, hoping to match the angle or spot. Nothing lined up. We checked the metadata for the photos. Everything looked normal, except the GPS tags. They were blank. Every other photo from the trip had coordinates, even the ones taken earlier that morning. These ones just had empty fields, where the location should have been. We didn't stay much longer after that. We started back the way we came and didn't talk for a while. Halfway back, I glanced down at my Garmin. It showed we were half a mile east of where we should have been, like we drifted. But the terrain looked the same. I stopped and tried to line up our trail on the map with the wash we'd walked along earlier. Something was off. The scrub patterns, the layout of the rocks, it looked close but not quite right. We eventually reached the car, and everything from that point on was normal. Phone worked, car started fine, no new photos. Later that night, Kevin called me. He said he tried uploading the weird photos to his laptop, but the files wouldn't transfer. They'd open on the phone, but not on the computer. He tried emailing one to me, but the attachment failed every time. Same thing when I tried. Even screenshots wouldn't send. The moment I attached one, the messaging app would crash. Eventually, we just gave up. The next weekend, we went back to the same trailhead. We hiked the same path, tried to find the exact spot where it happened. We couldn't. The ridge was there and the wash, but nothing looked exactly like it had. It felt like we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Only the GPS trail said we hadn't. The photos are still on my phone. I stopped trying to send them. Every once in a while, I look at that one of us standing apart with no one else in frame. I never remember standing like that. And I don't know who took it. I was driving across eastern Utah, heading toward Grand Junction after visiting a friend in Salt Lake. It was around 11:30 at night, mid-September. I'd been on the road most of the day and probably should have stopped for the night, but I just wanted to get home. Highway 191 south of Moab is mostly straight and empty for miles. No towns, no real turnoffs, just scrubland and red rock stretching out in every direction. I had the windows cracked because the AC in my car was spotty and the air outside was cool enough to keep me awake. I had music on low and a travel mug of gas station coffee between my legs. I noticed the light a little past Crescent Junction, just a single white light behind me. Not super bright, but sharp, like a headlight, only higher than you'd expect. At first, I figured it was just a truck, or maybe someone with their high beams on way in the distance, but it didn't move the way a car should. It stayed the same size in my rearview mirror, same brightness, same distance, for over an hour. I slowed down at one point to about 40, just to see if it would catch up. It didn't. I sped up to 75. Still there, same size, same spot. I even pulled onto the shoulder at one point and waited with the engine running, thinking if it was a real car, it'd pass me. It didn't. The light stayed exactly where it was. When I got back on the road, it reappeared in the mirror within a minute. Not gradually catching up, just suddenly there, like it had been waiting at the same distance the whole time. I checked my side mirrors to see if it might be a reflection or something stuck to the rear window. Nothing, and it wasn't on the horizon like a distant tower or aircraft. It moved with the turns in the road, always centered perfectly behind me. I kept driving and tried not to stare at it too much. After a while, I shut the music off and just focused on the road. The only sound was the wind through the windows and the low drone of the tires on asphalt. Somewhere past the turnoff for the Needles district, I noticed something else. No bugs. Normally at night in that part of the country, your windshield's a mess inside 30 minutes. But it was clean. No splats, no buzzing, no flashes in the headlights. The air felt too still. About 20 minutes later, I passed an old boarded-up gas station. One of those with the old-style pumps out front and a rusted sign you can barely read. I passed it, then checked my mirror again. Now there were two lights, still the same distance back, still not getting closer. But now they were side by side, spaced like headlights. I watched for a few seconds, then flicked my lights off briefly, thinking maybe I'd see more stars or make out a shape behind them. When I killed my lights, the rear lights vanished too. Total blackness. I flipped my headlights back on immediately, and the rear lights came back just as quick. Same spot. Not any closer, not dimmer or brighter. Just right where they'd been. That's when I noticed my radio had started picking up static. I hadn't turned it back on, but I heard the faint crackle through the speakers. I tapped the knob to turn it off completely, but the static kept going for another 20 seconds or so before fading out. I kept glancing at the clock on the dash. It was 1:12 a.m. the last time I checked. I know because I remember thinking I was going to stop at a rest area near Monticello and take a nap. But the next time I looked down, the clock said 2:04. The road hadn't changed. No exits, no towns, no rest area. Just the same stretch of highway I'd been on for the last hour, and the lights were gone. I didn't see them fade or drift away. I just glanced in the mirror and there was nothing behind me. I slowed down and scanned the rear view, rolled down the windows farther to listen. Still dead quiet. Eventually, I reached Monticello and pulled into a gas station that was just opening up. The guy inside was friendly, probably in his 60s. I asked if there were any other cars that had come through recently, maybe a truck or RV with a strange headlight setup. He said I was the first person he'd seen in over 2 hours. I asked if he'd seen anything weird that night. He just shrugged and said, "It's a weird part of the state. You see things." Then he changed the subject. I sat in the parking lot for a while with the engine running, watching the sun come up over the messes. My phone had full bars, but no notifications. Nothing from the last 2 hours. Not even the map app logging my location. The last pin was back near the gas station I'd passed almost an hour and a half earlier. The trip to Grand Junction should have taken 6 hours. I left Salt Lake at noon. I didn't get home until almost 9 the next morning. I was camped out in the Nevada desert, just south of Beatty, near an old gravel road that branches off into the hills. I'd been out there before a few times, mostly for the quiet. It's one of those places where you can sit outside at night and hear nothing at all, not even wind if it's calm enough. This was late April, so the nights were cool but not freezing, and the sky was perfectly clear. I got out there around 6 p.m. and set up camp in a little flat area tucked between some low rock formations. Nothing fancy, just a small 2-person tent, sleeping bag, cooler, and my pack. No fire since I didn't want to draw attention, and I had a jet boil if I needed anything hot. I had cell signal when I parked, but once I hiked in about a mile, that dropped off fast. I spent the evening hiking a short ridge nearby and got back to camp right around sunset. Ate a granola bar and some jerky, then climbed into my sleeping bag around 10. I don't usually sleep straight through out there. The desert gets cold and your back starts to feel every rock under the ground pad. But that night, I was out hard. No dreams, no tossing around, just blackness. Then I woke up. No real reason. Just that dead silence you snap into sometimes, like your brain knows something's off before you're even fully awake. I checked my phone for the time, 4:13 a.m. Battery was fine. I tapped the GPS app I always use when I'm solo hiking, just to check where I was. It took a second to load, then showed my coordinates. Only they weren't where I set up camp. It said I was roughly 2 miles northeast of where I'd parked. At first, I figured maybe I didn't mark the original spot properly, so I closed the app and reopened it. Same result. I checked my downloaded offline map. It had my previous saved pins, including one I'd dropped that night when I set up. That pin was still there, and my blue dot was nowhere near it. I sat up, unzipped the tent, and looked around. Same rocks, same flat stretch, same little Joshua tree I'd tied a reflective marker to. Nothing had changed. The tent hadn't moved. My boots were still sitting just outside the flap where I left them. I checked for tracks in the dirt. Nothing but mine from the day before. The surface was soft, that fine, dusty gravel that shows every step. No drag marks, no tire treads, no animal prints. Just stillness. I stepped outside barefoot and did a slow circle with my flashlight. The air was perfectly still. No wind. The stars looked the same, maybe a little lower in the sky since it was closer to dawn, but nothing else out of place. I walked out a few yards, checking for anything, any signs that someone had come through or moved my gear. Nothing. I pulled my boots on and opened my GPS again. The dot was still there, 2 miles northeast of my pin. I tried using the compass function to backtrack in case I'd messed up and just camped in a similar looking spot without realizing. But the direction I'd walked from the truck wasn't northeast. It was west, slightly northwest. That much I was sure of. At some point, I stopped trying to make sense of it and just stood there listening. and I realized how loud the quiet was. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of the highway you can usually hear if you really listen. Just total silence. Then there was a sound, not close, but high up, a faint pulsing hum. It didn't seem to be coming from one direction, more like it was overhead, but too soft to pinpoint. I turned off my flashlight and looked up. Nothing but stars. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, waiting for something to move or flash or make a clearer noise, but it never did. The hum faded gradually, like it was slipping away, not getting quieter. That probably doesn't make sense, but that's the only way I can describe it. Eventually, I climbed back into the tent, still fully dressed, and just sat there with the light off. Every now and then, I'd check my GPS again. Same position. No movement. My tent hadn't moved an inch, but according to every map, I was in a completely different spot. Around 5:30, the sky started to lighten. I finally stepped out and walked up one of the little ridges nearby to get a better look. From there, I could see the road where I'd parked the truck the night before, and I was nowhere near it. The land didn't match what I'd seen coming in. I should have been facing the ridge I hiked at sunset, but it was gone. This place had similar features, but they weren't in the same layout. I packed up quickly, trying to stay calm. It took me nearly 2 hours to get back to the road, following the GPS route manually, until I spotted my truck from a distance. It was parked exactly where I left it. When I got home, I checked the coordinates again on a full map. The spot I'd woken up in wasn't close enough to my camp to be explained by just wandering in the dark, and there were no trails, no service roads, nothing between the 2 points, just open desert. I don't camp in that area anymore. I don't really have a reason. It's not like anything threatened me or chased me off. But something about that night felt like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Or maybe I was supposed to be there, and that's worse. And I worked the graveyard shift at a small convenience store on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just the usual late-night stuff, restocking shelves, watching the cameras, and hoping the quiet lasts. This happened a few months ago, maybe late spring, when the days start getting longer but the nights still feel cold and empty. It was just past midnight when I first noticed the light. I was standing by the front window, wiping down the counter, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught something blinking behind the tree line that borders the parking lot. It was a single red light, nothing like the usual car brake lights or street lamps. The weird thing was how steady it was, blinking on and off in the exact same spot every 10 seconds. I counted. 1 blink, pause, blink, pause, like a metronome. At first, I thought it was a car parked just beyond the trees, maybe someone fishing or camping nearby, but the parking lot was empty and the road out front was dead. I stepped outside, walked over to the edge of the lot where the trees started, trying to see through the branches, but the light was too deep in the woods to spot anything else. No sounds, no movement, just the red blinking light, glowing faintly between the trunks. I went back inside, thinking maybe it was some kind of hunting light or someone using a flashlight to signal. But the timing was too exact, too deliberate. It didn't feel random. The clock ticked on. Every 10 seconds, the light blinked again. I started timing it with my phone. 10 seconds, 10 seconds, always the same. It didn't speed up or slow down. It stayed perfectly regular for nearly half an hour. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. I kept watching it from behind the counter, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and something else. Something tight, like my chest was getting squeezed. I tried calling my friend on a break, but no answer. Texted her a quick message about the blinking light, but didn't get a reply. Then, suddenly, the light moved. It didn't slide sideways or jump around like I expected. It shot straight up. Like someone flicked a switch, it started rising vertically, fast, cutting through the dark tree line. I saw it clearly against the night sky, climbing higher and higher until it vanished somewhere above the clouds. There was no noise, no engine hum, no crackle or buzz. Just that red dot rising like a flare, getting smaller and smaller, then gone. I stood frozen for a minute, not sure if I'd imagined it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked back toward the trees, but the light was definitely gone. No blinking, no flicker, no sign it had ever been there. I thought about calling the cops or someone, but who would believe me? A blinking red light that moves straight up and disappears? Sounds like something from a movie. I clocked back in, trying to focus on my work, but the whole night felt off. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting the light to come back or see something moving in the shadows. A couple of hours later, near closing time, I heard it, soft footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate. I looked up from the counter, but the lot was empty. No cars, no people. I stepped outside, heart pounding a little, and scanned the edge of the trees. Nothing. Just dark shapes and the rustle of wind through leaves. I didn't want to stick around anymore. Grabbed my things, locked the doors early, and got in my car. As I backed out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a second, I thought I saw a faint red glow near the tree line, but when I looked again, it was gone. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. It was my friend finally replying, "Sorry, fell asleep. Everything okay?" I wanted to tell her, but the words felt strange coming out loud. I just said yeah. When I got home, I double-checked the security footage from the store. The cameras didn't pick up the light at all. Not a flicker. The timestamp showed the usual empty parking lot, nothing unusual. That was the weirdest part. If it was real, why didn't the cameras see it? I still think about that light sometimes. The steady blinking, the way it rose silently and vanished. I don't know what it was, or why I was the only one who saw it that night, but I know it was there, somewhere just beyond the trees, watching. I was 16 when this happened, and I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Not because I was scared of getting in trouble or anything like that, but because I honestly didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I was lying, or crazy, or both. It was early August, and I'd gone out for a solo hike. My dad used to take me camping a lot when I was younger, so I was pretty comfortable being out in the woods alone. I wasn't that far from home, but maybe 5 miles north of the old fire road that cuts behind our neighborhood. There's this little clearing off a side trail, maybe 10 minutes off the main path, and I'd been there before a couple times. I liked it because no one else ever seemed to go that way, probably too overgrown for most people. That day I left around noon with a small pack, just some water, a snack, flashlight, and my phone. I wasn't planning to stay the night or anything. Just wanted to get out and be by myself for a while. The hike-in was totally normal. Hot, quiet, buggy. I didn't see a single other person after I passed the trailhead. I got to the clearing a little after 2 p.m. I remember because I checked my phone to make sure I had enough daylight left before heading back. I ate a granola bar, lay down in the grass, and must have dozed off. It wasn't planned, just that kind of thick summer heat where your body slows down and you shut your eyes for a second. When I woke up, it was darker than it should have been. Not night, but dusky. Sky was gray, a little overcast, and I remember thinking it felt later than it was. I checked my phone, 5:41 p.m., and realized I'd been out cold for almost 4 hours. That didn't make sense. I'd never slept that long on the ground before. What was weirder, though, was how quiet it was. The clearing is usually full of birds and crickets, wind in the trees, background noise. But when I sat up, it was totally still. No wind, no bugs. Even the trees weren't moving. I stood up and stretched, a little disoriented, and that's when I noticed my pack had been unzipped. Not wide open, just slightly. Like someone had started to open it and stopped. I thought maybe I hadn't closed it all the way, but I always double-check that stuff. My flashlight had been taken out and placed next to the bag. Not far, just set down like someone meant to borrow it and then change their mind. I picked it up and turned it on. It worked fine. Nothing was missing from the pack. Water bottle was still there. My phone was in my pocket the whole time. That kind of set me on edge. I started scanning the tree line, checking for movement, didn't see anything, but the feeling that someone had been near me was strong enough that I backed up toward the center of the clearing without even thinking about it. I didn't hear anything, didn't see any prints, but I had this feeling in my chest, like I wasn't alone. I decided to head back right then. It was going to get dark soon, and I didn't want to be out there in the woods if someone else was messing around. I moved fast, barely stopped for anything. The woods stayed quiet the whole way back to the trailhead. No animal sounds, no hikers, no breeze. It wasn't until I got back to the fire road that the noise came back. Cicadas, birds, all of it, like someone had flipped a switch. I got home just after 7. My mom asked if I had fun and said I looked like I'd gotten some sun. I told her it was a normal hike. I didn't feel like talking about the weird stuff, mostly because I didn't know what to say. It wasn't until later that night that I found the video. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my photos to delete some old ones, and I noticed a video thumbnail I didn't recognize. It didn't have a timestamp next to it. Just the first frame, dark, grainy, with a faint outline of trees. I tapped it. It was about 12 seconds long. Shaky, like whoever was holding the phone didn't know they were recording or was trying to be discreet. It showed me. Sleeping. In the clearing. I was lying on my side with my arms curled up under my head, exactly how I remember waking up. The video was taken from the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, just far enough that the grass muffled the sound, but I could still hear it. Breathing. Slow, uneven breaths. Not mine. The angle didn't move. Whoever was holding the phone was crouched or low to the ground. The shot stayed fixed on me, zoomed in slightly, then cut out. No sound at the end, no movement. Just cut to black. I stared at it for probably 5 straight minutes. Checked the info. No date, no time, no GPS tag. Just listed under videos with a file number that didn't match any of the others. It shouldn't have been there. I checked the rest of my phone. Nothing else had changed. No weird files, no deleted apps, no signs of tampering. But the video was real. I watched it again, this time with the volume up. The breathing was there, soft, slow, but definitely human, or at least close to it. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept getting up to check my window, check my closet, make sure my phone was still where I left it. I didn't show it to anyone. I thought about deleting it, but I couldn't bring myself to. The next morning, I went through my backpack again, carefully this time. Everything was where it should be. No dirt, no scratches, no signs of forced entry. The flashlight still worked. The zipper wasn't damaged. But the video hadn't just appeared by accident. I don't use cloud backups or anything like that. No one else has access to my phone. It's never left my side. And even if someone had snuck up and taken it while I was asleep, they would have had to unlock it, record the video, save it, and relock the phone without waking me. All within a few feet of my head. And that doesn't explain the breathing. I stopped going to that clearing after that. I kept hiking, just stuck to open trails where I could see other people. Every once in a while, I'd get the feeling that someone was behind me, not close, but not far either. Just far enough to stay out of sight. I never found any other videos. That one disappeared a few months later. I didn't delete it. It was just gone one day. I checked every folder, ran a search, plugged it into my laptop, nothing. It's like it deleted itself. But I remember it. I remember the way I looked lying there. The way the trees moved behind me, just barely. The way the breathing sped up slightly just before the video ended, like whatever was filming me was getting closer. I was sitting on the porch that night with a beer, same as I had probably 100 times before. It was one of those clear, quiet nights where everything's still, like the world's holding its breath. No wind, no bugs, just the sound of my old dog shifting around on the porch boards beside me and the creak of the rocking chair. I've always liked looking at the stars. Not in any big poetic way or anything, I just like the calm of it. I live out in the country, no real light pollution. So on a good night, the whole sky's laid out, bright enough you can see the faint edge of the Milky Way. That night was one of the better ones, crisp and clean, cool enough to keep the mosquitoes away, warm enough to not need a jacket. I didn't even have the porch light on. I remember I was just zoning out, watching the sky the way you do when your mind's not on anything. A few satellites were passing overhead, those slow, steady crawlers that go in a straight line, same speed, all the way through. Planes too, up high with their blinking reds and whites. I know the difference. I'm not one of those people who sees something weird in the sky and immediately jumps to wild conclusions. But then I noticed something off. It was just one star, off to the left, maybe a few inches above the horizon from my angle. Bright, but not the brightest. At first, I didn't think anything of it. But then I noticed it was moving. Not fast, just a slow, steady drift, right to left, sideways across the sky. Not down, not up, just straight across. And it wasn't twinkling like the other stars. It held this steady, cold kind of glow, like a headlight way off in the distance. Pale white. I watched it for a full minute, just trying to make sense of it. My first thought was maybe a satellite at a weird angle, or maybe one of those high-altitude weather balloons. But it wasn't shaped like anything. No outline, no color shift, no blinking, just that little white dot sliding sideways where nothing should have been moving like that. Then it stopped. It didn't slow to a stop. It just stopped. Midair, like a cursor on a screen. It hovered there for maybe 10 seconds, and then it blinked out. Not faded, blinked, gone. Like someone hit a switch or deleted it. I actually rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired or not seeing things right. I scanned the area around where it had been, but there was nothing. Just black sky and stars still twinkling like normal. No cloud cover, no light flashes, no sound. I waited a few minutes, but it didn't come back. It wasn't until I stood up and stretched that I realized how quiet it had gotten. The dog wasn't moving anymore. He was sitting straight up, ears forward, staring out into the dark field past the fence. I called his name, but he didn't look at me. Just stayed locked in, like he was watching something I couldn't see. I didn't see anything out there at first, just the tall grass swaying a little. But when I looked harder, I realized the grass wasn't moving the same way it had been earlier. It wasn't blowing in the wind, it was shifting like something was moving through it. Low to the ground. I couldn't hear footsteps or rustling, just this very faint, swaying pattern that looked like it was being disturbed from underneath. I grabbed the flashlight from the table by the door and clicked it on. The beam didn't reach far, but enough to light up the first 20 feet of the yard. The grass looked normal under the beam, but when I moved it toward the fence, I thought I saw something duck down. Something quick, like a head or shoulder dropping low. The dog finally barked, once, loud and sharp, then went quiet again. I kept the flashlight pointed toward where I'd seen the movement, but nothing came up. No animals, no person, nothing. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just watching. The weirdest part was how wrong everything felt. Not scary, exactly, just off. Like the timing of the world was a little broken. I didn't even notice at first that the air had this low buzzing sound to it. Not like an engine, more like a phone vibrating on a table. Real low, barely there, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Eventually the dog relaxed. He laid back down like nothing happened. I turned off the flashlight and sat again, but I didn't drink the rest of the beer, just held it, watching the stars. That light never came back. I figured that'd be the end of it, but the next night I went back out to the porch again, mostly just curious if I'd see it happen again. Same setup, same time, same clear sky. I stared at the same spot where the thing had blinked out, but there was nothing unusual. After maybe an hour, I gave up and headed back inside. But right as I shut the door, I heard a sound. Not loud, more like something brushing up against the house from the outside. A kind of soft scraping, like a branch dragging across the siding. I waited, listening. It came again, this time closer to the kitchen window. I went to the window, but kept the lights off. Pulled the curtain back just a little and peeked out. Nothing. I opened the door real slow and stepped out onto the porch again. The dog came with me, tail down, ears back. He didn't bark this time, just stayed right by my side, staring off toward the back of the house. I walked around, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the wall and down to the grass. Still nothing. No animal tracks, no broken branches, no wind. But when I came around the far side of the house, something made me stop. There was a spot on the lawn where the grass was flattened, just a perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across. Not burnt, not discolored, just pressed down like something heavy had settled there. I touched the ground with my hand. The soil wasn't wet, but it felt cold, way colder than the air around it. I backed away, shining the flashlight around, but still, nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside kept me on edge. I kept thinking about that star blinking out, the grass, the movement near the fence, the buzzing. None of it added up. For the next week or so, I didn't sit on the porch. Just didn't feel right. But I still looked at the sky through the window sometimes. Never saw that light again. But a couple nights later, I did wake up to something strange. The digital clock by my bed was flashing like we'd lost power, but nothing else in the house was off. The fridge was humming, the porch light was still on, only the clock was reset. I checked my phone for the time, and it was 3:42 a.m. I got up just to make sure everything was fine. The dog was at the back door again, alert, staring out into the dark. I flipped on the back porch light and looked out, and for a second, I swear I saw something standing at the edge of the trees, just tall and still. No features, just a shape. And then it stepped backward and vanished behind the tree line. I stood there for a long time before going back to bed. I didn't sleep after that. I haven't told many people about it. A couple friends, maybe. No one really knows what to say. And I don't know what to say either. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't drinking that much. It just happened. And I've been watching the sky a lot more since. I woke up a little after 5 because my dog started whining. She sleeps at the foot of the bed and usually doesn't make a sound unless she needs to go out. She's older, so I figured it was just her bladder, and I got up without thinking much about it. When I slid the back door open, she stopped short, just stood there, staring at the yard. I gave her a little nudge, but she wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed the smell. Not strong, but sharp, like burnt plastic or something electrical. I stepped out onto the porch barefoot, thinking maybe the neighbors had burned something in a fire pit the night before. But the smell didn't seem to be coming from anywhere in particular. Then I saw the dust. It was pitch black, not like dirt or mulch or even ash. It looked like someone had sprinkled charcoal powder all over the yard. It was mostly in the center, covering maybe a 10-foot circle, but there were lighter streaks closer to the house. The porch steps had faint smudges like someone with soot on their shoes had walked up and then disappeared. I bent down and touched it. It was dry, fine, and clung to my fingers. No moisture, no grit, just black powder. I checked the sky. It was overcast, barely light out. No smoke, no clouds moving fast, just still and quiet. Too quiet, actually. There were no birds. Usually there's a few chirping in the trees by then, but the whole yard was dead silent. I tried calling the dog again, but she backed away and hid behind the door frame. She's never done that before, not even during thunderstorms. I ended up just standing out there for a while, looking around, trying to figure out where it could have come from. It didn't make sense. I live in the suburbs, no factories nearby, no construction crews, nothing that would dump that kind of material. And if it was from a fire or something, there would have been ash flakes, maybe some kind of scent. But this was different. Too fine, too uniform, like it had been laid down carefully. Around 6, I got my phone and took a few pictures. The dust didn't show up well in the camera unless I angled it right, but you could make out the contrast in the grass where it thinned out. I sent a photo to my friend Jenna, who works mornings, and asked if she'd ever seen something like it. She didn't answer right away, so I just made some coffee and kept checking through the blinds every so often. By 8:30, the yard was clean. I mean, completely, like it had never been there. No black powder, no smudges on the porch. The grass was normal color, no dead patches or burn marks. Even the smell was gone. I went out and stood in the same spot, squinting at the ground, but it was just plain grass. The weirdest part was the porch steps. I had seen those smudges earlier. I remembered thinking I'd need to wipe them down, but now there was nothing, no trace. The dog still wouldn't go out. I tried tossing her ball, even her leash, to see if she'd perk up, but she wouldn't step past the threshold. She kept sniffing the air and pacing. She wouldn't drink from her outside bowl either. I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I imagined it through sleep haze or something, but the pictures were still on my phone. One of them even had a clear boot print in the dust, mine from earlier. I stood in the same spot and held my foot up next to it, but the ground didn't look any different. It was like someone had cleaned it up with tweezers. I didn't really want to go back to sleep after that. I just sat on the couch with my laptop and looked up stuff about black powder in yards. The closest thing I found was about volcanic ash fallout, but we're nowhere near anything like that. Everything else was just guesses. Mildew, mold, pollution. but none of it matched what I saw, and nothing explained how it could vanish in a couple hours. Around 11, Jenna texted back and said it was probably a busted transformer nearby or maybe a blown up firework. She said she'd seen something like it once after a substation blew during a storm. But we hadn't had any storms, and I didn't hear anything loud during the night. Plus, there weren't any power outages. My clocks were all normal. I kept checking the yard throughout the day. It stayed clean. The dog eventually went out in the afternoon to pee, but she tiptoed to the very edge of the porch and did it on the gravel. Wouldn't go near the grass. I even tried walking across it barefoot again to see if it felt different. It didn't. Just cool, slightly damp in the shade. Normal. That night, I sat outside on the steps for a while with the porch light off, just trying to get a feel for it. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt weird, like I was waiting for something. The neighborhood was quiet. A couple cars passed in the distance. I could hear someone's wind chimes a few houses down, but my yard stayed completely still. No wind, no bugs, no motion. Even the trees didn't sway. I remember watching a plane fly overhead, just a regular one, blinking slowly across the sky, and wondering if it had anything to do with what happened. I couldn't explain why. It didn't feel related, but it also kind of did. That feeling like you're missing a connection just out of reach. A little after 10, I thought I saw a flicker of light over the fence. Just for a second, like someone flashing a small mirror from a distance. I stood up, thinking it might be a flashlight or someone in the woods behind the yard. But it didn't come back. I waited maybe 15 minutes before going inside. The next morning, the dog barked at the sliding door again. Not whining this time, actually barking. When I checked, there was nothing outside. The yard looked the same. But she refused to go near the door for the rest of the day. A few days later, I tried showing the pictures to a friend who works in environmental testing. He looked at them for a while and then said it might have been some kind of industrial dust blown in from the highway. I didn't argue, but it didn't sit right. The coverage was too clean, and the fact that it disappeared like that, with no wind or rain, just didn't make sense. I still walk the yard now and then looking for any sign it happened at all. The grass is healthy. No discoloration, no burn rings, no new growth or dead spots. But the dog never touches it anymore. She sticks to the patio or does her business out front. I haven't brought it up to the neighbors. I'm not really sure what I'd say. Every once in a while, I check the pictures again. They look kind of blurry now, like the black powder doesn't show up as clearly as I remember, but the boot print is still there. Same tread pattern as my hiking boots. I haven't cleaned the porch since. I just want to see if anything ever comes back. We were out on the lake late that night, just me and Jake, like we did most weekends when we wanted to get away from everything. It was one of those quiet, still nights where water looks like glass and the stars are so bright they almost feel close enough to reach. We had the little motorboat anchored a good distance from shore, lines in the water, just waiting for a bite. Nothing big planned, just fishing and talking, maybe catching some bass or catfish. The night was cold, but not freezing. I had a jacket on, Jake too. We sat on the back bench, each with a rod in hand. The only sound was the occasional plop when a bobber moved or a fish took a nibble. The boat creaked softly in the water, and the gentle ripple from our movements spread out around us. After a while, Jake went quiet, just staring out over the water behind the boat. I looked too, thinking maybe he saw something, maybe a bird or a fish jumping. Then we both heard it, a splash. It was sudden and heavy, like something big hitting the water hard right behind us. But here's the thing, there was no ripple, nothing spread out on the surface, just silence except for that weird splash noise. It was like the water had made the sound without moving. That didn't make sense. I looked over my shoulder and scanned the dark water. No wake, no movement. The surface was still perfectly smooth. Jake said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, feeling a little uneasy. We both stayed still, waiting, expecting maybe to see something break the water. Then came this low droning sound, coming from beneath the boat. It wasn't like any engine noise or the usual hum of insects or the wind. It was deep and steady, almost like a vibration you could feel through your bones. It didn't get louder or softer, just stayed there, this constant low buzz under the water. I asked Jake if he heard it. He nodded again, eyes wide now. We didn't say much after that, both just listening. The droning went on for several minutes. It didn't seem to be coming from any direction. It was just under us. I looked back toward shore, but it was too dark to see much beyond the tree line. The moon had slipped behind clouds, so the lake looked endless and black. The only light came from the little flashlight Jake had on the side of the boat. I shone it over the water, trying to catch any movement, but nothing showed up. After maybe 5 minutes, the droning stopped suddenly. No fade out, no gradual decrease, just cut off. The silence felt even heavier afterward. I told Jake to pull up the lines and start heading back. Neither of us said why, but I think we both wanted to get out of there. As Jake fired up the motor, the water around the boat stayed unnervingly still. No wakes, no splashes from the propeller, nothing. Usually, even the smallest movement would stir something up, but the lake just sat there, like it was holding its breath. We headed back slowly, neither of us talking much. The boat's motor was the only sound, but the water didn't respond as I expected. It didn't ripple or splash against the hull. I was watching the water more than the path ahead, trying to make sense of the quiet. At one point, Jake asked if I felt anything strange, like a presence or being watched. I said yeah, but it was hard to explain. It wasn't fear exactly, more like something was out there in the water or just below the surface. Something that didn't want us to notice it, but also didn't want to be ignored. About halfway back to shore, the boat's GPS screen flickered and went blank for a few seconds. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. It came back on with no problem, but the little glitch made the whole situation feel even more off. We made it to the dock without incident, and when I stepped onto the wooden planks, the familiar creak of the boards felt like a relief. The night air seemed less heavy there, and the lake looked normal again, reflecting the moonlight and stars without any weird silence or strange noises. Jake and I packed up quietly, neither of us eager to talk about what had happened. On the way home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some light or shape following us, but there was nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that splash in my head and the low drone vibrating under the boat like it was still there waiting. I haven't been back out to that part of the lake since. Not sure if I'll go again anytime soon. The night was quiet, too quiet, really, for the kind of job I had at the Ridgeview weather station. I was the night tech, basically just me, a few computers, and a bunch of instruments on this remote hilltop overlooking the Shenandoah Valley. The station was about as isolated as you could get without being in the middle of nowhere, maybe 2 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by forest and fields that stretched down toward the town of Madison. I'd worked the night shift here for 6 months, and mostly it was just me staring at radar screens and checking data logs, recording whatever weird weather passed through. I liked the solitude, honestly. My dog Tucker, a black lab with a white patch on his chest, came with me on these shifts, mostly because my apartment at home wasn't dog-friendly. Tucker was curled up on the floor next to the control desk that night, snoring softly, when the instruments suddenly started acting up. I was watching the usual readings, wind speed, humidity, atmospheric pressure, when my monitor flickered. Then a high-pitched buzzing sound filled the room for a second before cutting out. The electromagnetic sensor was showing a sharp spike, one of those massive jumps you'd expect with a thunderstorm or solar flare. The thing was, the sky outside was perfectly clear. No clouds anywhere, no wind, not even a stray leaf moving in the trees beyond the window. Tucker perked up, ears twitching, but didn't bark. I got up and looked out. The moon was full and bright, lighting up the trees and the empty field behind the station like daytime. No lightning, no planes, no satellites overhead, nothing to explain the spike. I checked the instruments again. Still the same jump in EM activity, like something had surged through the atmosphere, but I couldn't see or hear anything unusual. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a glitch in the equipment. These old sensors sometimes gave false alarms, especially when the temperature dropped at night. But then the weirdness started layering on. About 10 minutes after the spike, Tucker suddenly stood up and started growling low and steady, staring out the big window that faced the forest line. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. No animals, no movement. Just black trees and moonlight. I told him to calm down, but he wouldn't stop. He kept growling, hackles raised, teeth bared, not aggressive exactly, more like alert, warning me something was off. I moved closer, resting my hand on his back, but the feeling of unease was already creeping into my chest. Then the lights in the control room dimmed briefly, like someone flipped a switch for a second. The computers didn't reboot or lose power, but the monitors flickered again. I swear I heard a faint hum in the air, almost like static, but it wasn't coming from the machines. It was too low, too steady. I pulled up the security cameras on the screens, one pointed at the station's perimeter, the other scanning the edge of the woods about 100 yards away. Both showed nothing unusual. No vehicles, no people, no animals. I walked outside with a flashlight and Tucker tagging along, still tense but quieter now. The air was cold and crisp, and the stars stretched clear above. I scanned the tree line carefully, shining the beam through the branches. Nothing moved. No strange lights or shapes. No noise except the wind rustling leaves far off. I stayed out there for about 10 minutes, turning slowly in a circle, eyes peeled for anything out of place. When I went back inside, the spike on the EM sensor was gone, but a low-level hum lingered in the background, almost like a vibration you could feel in your bones. I tried calling my supervisor in Madison, but the radio link was crackling with static and eventually cut out. I switched to my cell phone. No signal. The station sat on a ridge between hills and dense forest. The cell tower was miles away, so I wasn't surprised. Still, it made me feel more isolated than usual. I kept an eye on the data feed. Nothing else abnormal happened for the rest of my shift, but the feeling didn't leave me. Tucker wouldn't settle down, pacing the floor and occasionally growling softly at the window. Every so often, the lights dimmed a little or flickered, like the building itself was breathing. When the sun started to rise, I was relieved. I packed up my gear and hooked Tucker's leash to the station door. On the way down the dirt path to the truck, I looked back once more at the weather station. The instruments were quiet now. The forest behind it seemed normal in the morning light. But as I was driving home, I glanced up at the sky and caught something moving in the corner of my eye. A faint glow, drifting silently just above the treetops. It wasn't like a plane or helicopter. It moved too smoothly, without sound or blinking lights. I blinked, and it was gone. When I got home, I let Tucker out into the backyard. He seemed tired but okay, like he had no idea what he'd been barking about all night. I sat on the porch for a while, watching the early morning sky, wondering what the hell had happened up on that hill. I still don't know. The instruments caught something real enough to disrupt the sensors and mess with the power, but nothing that anyone could see. No obvious source, no explanation. Tucker hasn't acted strange since. Neither have I, really. Just this quiet, unsettled feeling that maybe whatever it was is still out there, somewhere beyond the trees, waiting or watching. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear that low hum again, just faint enough to make the silence feel wrong. It was a short night flight from Salt Lake City to Winnemucca, just a personal run, nothing official. I fly a little Cessna 182, older but well-maintained, and I've done that route more times than I can count. The air was smooth that night. Visibility was excellent, even with the moon still low. Around 10:15 p.m., I was cruising at 9,500 feet, trimmed out and steady. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I was maybe 25 minutes out from the Nevada line when I noticed a faint glow out of the corner of my eye, off to the right. At first, I thought it was just a ground light, maybe a ranch or some kind of vehicle, but it looked too high. I leaned toward the window and saw 3 dim white lights arranged vertically, maybe 10 or 15 miles out. They weren't moving horizontally, just slowly rising, perfectly straight. At first, I thought they might be reflections or stars, but they were too low for stars, and the spacing between them didn't change as I banked a little to get a better angle. I flipped on my map light and double-checked the chart, nothing out there. No towers, No airfields, no controlled airspace. I keyed the mic. Salt Lake Center. This is November 785, Mike Romeo. Just checking. You seeing any traffic in my 10 o'clock at maybe 10:05? Three lights, vertically stacked, ascending slowly. There was a pause. Then 785 Mike Romeo, negative. You're the only radar return in that sector. Can you confirm bearing? I told them it looked like 10 o'clock from my position, maybe 15 degrees off nose left and still climbing. They came back a second later saying they showed no traffic, civilian or otherwise, within a 50-mile radius. That's when I started feeling off. I don't know how else to describe it. Not afraid exactly, but something felt wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to be seeing what I was seeing. The lights kept rising, slow and steady, like they were pacing me, but vertically. They were dim, not blinking, steady white. Not strobes, not nav lights, just three solid dots. Then a fourth one appeared below them. No sudden flare. It just faded in, like the others. I asked Center again, Salt Lake, you sure there's no tower lighting or weather balloons or anything out here? These are bright and climbing. Negative, Mike Romeo. You're clear. No weather balloons in that region tonight. No scheduled launches. Do you want to divert? I didn't answer that right away. I was still watching the lights. They had stopped rising now. Just hanging there, maybe 5,000 feet above me. Hard to say for sure. But too close to be stars, too fixed to be helicopters. I banked slightly right to keep them in view. The second I did that, the whole group of lights shifted. Not toward me, not away, just sideways. The whole vertical column moved perfectly horizontal to the west, like it was sliding on glass. Still no change in spacing, no rotation, no blinking, just a slow, smooth drift. And then they stopped again. I keyed the mic. Salt Lake, I'm going to say again, I've got visual contact with 4 unidentified lights moving laterally. No strobes, no sound, no visible aircraft body. Are you positive I'm the only one out here? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, 785 Mike Romeo, we're painting only you in that airspace. Do you wish to declare any kind of emergency? I didn't. I just said no and kept flying. The lights held their new position for about another minute. Then, and this is the part I can't explain, they began rising again, but much faster this time. Not accelerating, just a sudden jump in speed, like a new gear had kicked in. They moved straight up and disappeared into the cloudless sky within maybe 3 seconds. I don't mean they dimmed out or flickered. I mean they shot up and were gone. Nothing left, just empty night sky. I sat there staring at the spot for a long time. Center didn't say anything else. I think they were waiting to see if I'd call back, but I didn't. The rest of the flight was quiet. I landed just after 11:30. Wind calm, hangar dark, I didn't see anyone on the ground. I tied the plane down, climbed in my truck, and drove to the motel without unpacking. A few odd things happened the next morning. My watch was off by 10 minutes, behind, and it's a solar Casio, doesn't lose time. My backup headset mic was partially unplugged and tucked under the seat, and my kneeboard, which I always clip to my leg during flight, was on the passenger side floor. Nothing big, nothing impossible. But I remember checking the time before I saw the lights. I remember clipping the board to my knee. I remember coiling my headset cord like always. But something had shifted. I haven't mentioned it to anyone except one other pilot I trust. He didn't laugh, didn't try to explain it either. Just listened and nodded and said he's seen odd lights more than once in that same general area. I haven't flown that route again at night. I was out on Lake Winfield fishing late one Saturday night, like I did most weekends. I usually liked it because the water was quiet and the stars were out, and the only light came from my little boat lantern and the occasional flicker of fireflies along the shore. The wind was calm, the air a little chilly, but not enough to make me uncomfortable. I had my dog, Benny, curled up at my feet. He's a border collie mix, always calm on the water unless a fish splashes close. Like around midnight, I was sitting back, reeling in a line when something caught my eye. I noticed a cluster of pale lights hovering just above the lake's surface, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from the boat. They were kind of soft and diffuse, not like any boat lights or lanterns I'd ever seen, and they didn't reflect on the water. That's the first thing that really threw me off. Normally, any light close to the water would reflect, right? These didn't. It was like the lake just swallowed the reflections whole. The lights didn't move with the wind either. The water was barely rippling, and the breeze was steady, but those lights just stayed put in the exact same spot. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or it was some kind of optical illusion. Benny stirred a little, lifting his head and growling softly at the lights, which was weird because he's usually pretty chill unless there's a bird or a raccoon nearby. I called out to the lights, half joking, "Hey, you folks lost or something?" No answer, of course. They just stayed there, steady and unblinking. The color was a pale blue-white, kind of eerie but not harsh, like glow sticks left out too long or maybe some weird bioluminescent bug, but way too big and steady for that. I thought about paddling closer to check them out, but something about those lights felt off. Not threatening exactly, just wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like they were watching but didn't want to be found. I grabbed my phone to take a video, but it was dead. Battery drained. I hadn't used it much that day, so that didn't make sense either. I figured no big deal. I'd get a better look tomorrow during the day. Maybe the lights were some kind of strange reflection or some prank. Still, Benny was tense, eyes locked on the lights. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The water around the lights wasn't quite right. Normally, even on a still night, you'd see the faintest ripple from something hovering that close to the surface. But this part of the lake was dead calm, like the water was being held still under those lights, almost like a silent bubble. I thought I might be imagining things, so I started talking to Benny to distract myself. Maybe it's some weird fishing buoys or those flares that float, huh? But no buoys make lights that's steady or pale, and I knew flares would drift with the wind. Then after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, the lights suddenly dimmed, like someone was turning down a dimmer switch slowly. They didn't blink out suddenly or shoot away. They just faded until they disappeared completely. The lake was just dark again. Benny relaxed and lay back down. I sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where the lights had been, feeling cold, even though the air was mild. On the ride back to the dock, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the lights again, but nothing showed up. The rest of the night was normal. Quiet, dark, with only the usual night sounds of water lapping and frogs calling. The next day, I talked to some of the other fishermen around town. Nobody mentioned seeing anything like that. No strange lights or unusual calm patches on the lake. I tried to check my phone's battery history to see if there was an explanation for it dying so suddenly, but everything looked normal, like it should have had at least 30% left. Since then, I haven't been back out at night on the lake alone. Benny and I still go during the day, but that spot where the lights hovered, I avoid it. The whole thing doesn't make much sense to me, and that's what messes with me the most. Something was there that night, just out of reach, quiet and still like a secret. I'm not sure if it was natural or something else, but it wasn't any fishing light or boat I've ever seen. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but Benny's still wary around that part of the lake. He doesn't like being near the water's edge after dark, and he's never been like that before. That's all I really know. I didn't expect to come back to my campsite and find everything arranged like some kind of weird ritual. I'd been out on the Pine Ridge Trail, a stretch of woods a couple hours east of Asheville. It was early September and the weather was cool but clear, dry enough for a good fire the night before. I was solo hiking and camping, which I usually prefer, except this time something didn't sit right. I'd left camp around 9 a.m. that morning, planning to hike a few miles further to the overlook and back by afternoon. Rosie, my golden retriever mix, stayed with me the whole time, except I'd tethered her to a tree while I went down a rocky slope to check out a small stream. That was around 11:30. When I got back, the campsite was off. I swear it was exactly as I'd left it, except it wasn't. All my stuff was moved, and it was arranged perfectly in a circle, like someone had taken their time placing every item down. My backpack, tent poles, shoes, even the little stove and fuel canister. Rosie was loose, standing right in the middle of the circle, looking at me like she didn't understand what was going on. I had no idea how long it'd been like that, but the grass beneath the circle had these faint scorch marks. Nothing heavy or burned through, just kind of darkened and brittle, like a campfire that barely caught. But there was no ash, no smell of smoke, just those faint rings pressed into the dirt. At first, I thought maybe some other campers had come through while I was gone, but no one else was around, and there was no sign anyone had been near. No footprints, no trash, no evidence of people at all except this arrangement. I started gathering my stuff back together, but it felt wrong. Every time I moved an item, Rosie growled low and kept staring into the trees around us. I checked the woods all around the site. No signs of anyone. That's when the quiet started feeling strange. Usually this part of the trail is full of bird song or the rustle of small animals, especially in the morning. But the woods were dead silent. No wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Just the occasional snap of a twig, but only when I moved. I packed up as fast as I could, Rosie never leaving my side. The whole time, I had this sense that something was watching me, just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. But every time I glanced over, there was nothing. The hike back was tense. The silence followed me the whole way. No birds, no squirrels, nothing usual for a forest. Rosie stayed close, ears pricked, muscles tense. When I reached the trailhead parking lot, I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was nearly 3 p.m. I'd been gone maybe 4 hours total, but it felt like more, like time was off somehow. The strangest part came when I got home that evening. I unpacked my backpack, and among the gear was a small patch of scorched grass stuck to the bottom of my water bottle case. It was dry, brittle, and smelled faintly of something burnt, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. It wasn't part of the campsite dirt, and I didn't recall picking it up anywhere else. Rosie seemed tired and uneasy all night, yet pacing between the living room and the bedroom, her eyes wide, watching corners and shadows I couldn't see. The next day, I went back to the site with a friend, Tom, who hikes the area a lot. I wanted to see if anything else had changed. We found the spot where my camp had been, and sure enough, the faint scorch marks were still in the grass. Tom looked closer and said the pattern was weird, like a rough circle with tiny arcs radiating out from it, almost like a symbol. He said it looked deliberate, but didn't recognize it from any camping or survival signs. Neither did I. We took some photos, but on my phone, the marks didn't show clearly. On his phone, the pictures were just blurry, with patches of light that flickered in and out when you looked at them. We agreed to keep it to ourselves. Didn't want to sound crazy. Since then, I've kept Rosie close, and every time I'm in the woods now, I feel like I'm being watched. Not by animals, but something else. I don't know what exactly happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was laid out that way. It doesn't feel like any normal camping prank or mistake. It just feels wrong. I never planned to camp near an old missile silo. Honestly, I picked that spot on a whim just because it was quiet and away from the usual crowded campgrounds. I'd driven out from Lincoln, Nebraska, looking for a weekend alone with my thoughts, a little break from work, and the city noise. I found this spot off a gravel road just a few miles from a decommissioned missile silo that's been out of use for decades. There's nothing left but some concrete bunkers, rusted fences, and an eerie silence that sticks to the place. I pulled my RV into a clearing not far from the silo, set up the satellite dish, and got settled in. I wasn't expecting much beyond a quiet weekend reading and maybe a hike. The sky was clear that evening, with a slow breeze and just a hint of chill in the air. I remember checking my watch about 10 p.m. before I settled down for the night. That first night was mostly normal. I fell asleep around midnight, but just before 3 a.m., I woke up because of this deep, low hum that seemed to vibrate through the whole camper. It wasn't loud, exactly, but it was constant and felt almost physical, like the ground itself was humming. I sat up and listened, thinking maybe it was some distant machinery or a truck on the gravel road, but there was nothing. No engine sounds, no headlights, just that hum. At exactly 3 a.m., my phone screen flickered, and the clock reset to 12 a.m. For a second, then went back to the right time. The lights inside the camper dimmed for a moment, and my little radio crackled with static before going silent, then came back on. Nothing else seemed broken, but everything electronic, my phone, the radio, the digital clock on the microwave, glitched like that, just for a couple of seconds. I chalked it up to a power surge or some interference from who knows what. The old missile silo was still humming faintly, like it was alive beneath the dirt. I tried to go back to sleep, but kept waking up every few minutes, always right around the same time, 3 a.m. The next night, the same thing happened. The hum started a little before 3, got louder for a few minutes, and then just stopped. And right at 3 a.m., the electronics all blinked out for a second, and just like the night before. That's when I started to notice other odd stuff. My laptop, which I'd left open on the table, had weird files show up. Just blank text documents with nothing inside, but timestamps right at 3:01 a.m. Nothing I saved, nothing I opened. I deleted them each morning, but new ones appeared the next night. I asked around on some local forums and from people I met in town. No one else reported hearing the hum, and nobody said their electronics acted up like mine. The missile silo had been out of commission since the 80s. No one used it anymore. No radio towers nearby, no power plants or factories. The third night, I was trying to stay awake, waiting for the hum. At 2:45 a.m., I was outside, standing near my RV with a flashlight. The air was colder now, and the sky had clouded over, thick gray low clouds that swallowed the stars. The hum started around 2:55, a low vibration under my feet that rose slowly. It wasn't a mechanical sound exactly, more like a frequency you could feel rather than hear. I looked toward the silo, which was just a dark silhouette against the cloudy sky, and noticed a faint glow around the top edge. It wasn't a bright light, just a soft, pulsing orange glow. I thought maybe it was just a reflection of the moon or something in the clouds, but the moon was completely blocked. At 3 a.m., the hum peaked, then suddenly stopped. That's when the electronics blinked again. My phone shut off and rebooted, the radio crackled and went silent, and even the small LED lights on my RV's control panel flickered. For a moment, everything was dead quiet. Then the glow above the silo disappeared, and the clouds seemed to shift, almost like they parted for a second. I stood there frozen for a while, then went back inside, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I checked my phone and saw the battery had dropped nearly to 20% during the night, even though I hadn't used it. The radio had a weak buzzing sound that wouldn't go away no matter how much I fiddled with it. And the laptop, again, had a new blank file, time-stamped exactly at 3:01 a.m. The rest of the day was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching from the silo or the surrounding trees. The wind shifted oddly sometimes, carrying strange smells, metallic, almost like ozone or burnt wire. The fourth night, I decided to record audio with my phone. I left it on the table and tried to stay awake until after 3. The hum started again, and when it hit its peak at exactly 3 a.m., I heard something else beneath the vibration, a faint clicking noise, like a slow mechanical heartbeat or a signal. It was steady, rhythmic, and didn't match anything natural. After that, I looked out the window again and caught a glimpse of something moving near the edge of the silo, just a shadow shifting in the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I was curious. What could explain any of this? I'd read about old military sites having strange electromagnetic fields, but nothing matched what I was experiencing. On the 5th night, I left the camper door unlocked and went outside just before 3. It was chilly, and the clouds had cleared, revealing a starless black sky. The hum started again, this time louder and more intense. The air vibrated with it, and I felt a slight pressure in my ears. The orange glow appeared again around the silo's edge, pulsing softly. Then at 3 a.m., my watch and phone both stopped for a full 10 seconds. The radio died completely, no static, no sound. The control panel lights went dark. Then everything flickered back on, and the glow vanished. I stayed outside another half hour, but nothing else happened. The next morning, my electronics seemed fine for the first time. No strange files, no dead battery, no buzzing radio. I packed up and left before dark. Driving away, I looked back at the silo fading into the distance and wondered if whatever was causing all that was tied to the place or just some odd natural phenomenon. I never found an explanation that fit, and no one else I talked to had heard or seen anything similar. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint hum in the back of my mind. Not loud, but enough to make me look around, wondering if it's back or if I just imagined the whole thing. I set up the time-lapse on a Tuesday night in mid-September. Skies were clear, no moon, pretty ideal for stargazing. I was out behind my place in Driftwood, Texas, kind of a scrubby hilltop that backs up to some ranch land. There's not a ton of light pollution if you face away from Austin, and I built a little platform out there with a level mount and power for my gear. I'd just gotten a new camera, a ZWO ASI 533, and I wanted to test it on a longer sequence, something like 6 hours. I mounted it on my Skywatcher tracker and pointed it towards Cygnus. I wasn't trying to catch anything in particular, just wanted to see how the noise looked on the sensor over time. Everything was routine. I calibrated the mount, triple-checked polar alignment, locked down the intervalometer to shoot one frame every 15 seconds. Started the sequence at around 8:20 p.m. and left it running through the night. Next morning, I woke up around 6 and went out to bring the gear in. Nothing seemed off. I dumped the images onto my desktop and let them compile into a time-lapse while I made coffee. I wasn't even planning on watching the full thing, just skipping around to check for clouds or motion blur. I started scrubbing through it around 8 a.m., just a standard star field. The Milky Way drifted slowly across the frame, satellites here and there, a couple of faint meteors. But then I noticed something strange. There was a single point of light, bright, steady, not blinking, just above the frame's bottom right corner in the first few minutes. At first, I assumed it was Jupiter or maybe Vega peeking in, but as the frames progressed, that point didn't follow the rest of the sky. Everything else moved left to right, as expected with the Earth's rotation. But this one, it moved the other way. Not fast, really slow. Like, if I hadn't had it sped up 200x, I wouldn't have noticed at all. But frame to frame, it was drifting against the starfield, just a hair at a time. I thought it might be a plane, but it didn't blink. No strobe, no color shift, no tail, and it stayed in frame for almost 40 minutes. That's way too long for a plane, or even a satellite on a weird orbit. I backed up and watched again, slower this time. You could see it make these tiny directional changes, not enough to jump, just a subtle wobble, like it was correcting itself. The path wasn't perfectly smooth. About halfway through the sequence, the object stopped moving entirely, just sat in one spot for maybe 8 minutes. No fade, no blinking, no shift. Then it started drifting again, same speed but at a slightly different angle. I checked the tracking logs from the mount. It was running perfectly. No skips, no errors. If the mount had misaligned or stalled, the whole frame would have shifted. But all the stars stayed solid, which means the tracker was working fine. The rest of the footage was normal. Around 2:10 a.m., the point of light exited the top left of the frame, and that was it. I exported a clip of just that portion around 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. and played it again. This time, I noticed something else. At about 12:34 a.m., the object dimmed for a few seconds. Not flickered, dimmed, like someone turned down a dimmer switch and then brought it back up. The background stars didn't change at all, so it wasn't the atmosphere. I froze the frame where it was dimmest. It wasn't totally dark, still faintly visible, but it had dropped way below everything else in the scene. Then it slowly brightened back to its original intensity, steady as before. I zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. Still just a point. No shape, no halo, just a pure white pixel. I checked the sky databases next, Starlink paths, ISS passes, Iridium flares. Nothing matched the location or time. It wasn't in any cataloged flight path or satellite log for that night. Then I went back to my raw images, the individual frames. I found the exact ones where the dimming happened and looked closer. Around that time, something strange happened to the image noise. Every photo in the sequence had a little thermal grain, typical for long exposures. But for exactly 3 frames during that dim period, the background noise changed. The stars got fuzzier. Not out of focus, just softer, like the whole scene had been slightly diffused. After those 3 frames, everything snapped back to normal. I thought maybe dew had formed on the lens, but I checked the dew heater logs. Temps were steady, no condensation warnings. Also, the stars were sharp before and after, so it didn't track. I decided to do a screen recording of the whole time lapse and send it to a friend of mine, Kyle, who does astrophotography out in Arizona. I didn't give him any context, just told him to watch and tell me if he saw anything weird. He called me about 2 hours later and asked, "What the hell is that point of light doing?" So it wasn't just me. We both tried running the footage through different filters, contrast boosts, exposure curves, color isolations. Nothing changed what we were seeing. Still just that white point slowly drifting in the wrong direction, changing course once, dimming briefly, and then exiting frame. We even checked for bugs, maybe some weird sensor artifact, stuck pixel, something digital, but it changed position, brightness, and path over time. No way it was just a glitch. Out of curiosity, I checked my backup drive. It auto-logs time metadata from the mount and camera. Everything lined up except for one thing. There was a gap in the log between 1:20 and 6:54 a.m. 46 seconds, just gone. The camera kept shooting through it, and those frames are there, but the control software didn't record any settings or positional data for that window. Like, it just skipped over that period entirely. I hadn't touched anything. I was asleep. I've done maybe 200 overnight sequences out there. That's never happened. I didn't know what else to do with the footage. I didn't want to post it anywhere public. Just kept it on my drive, checked it a few more times over the next week. Every time I came away with the same feeling, like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to notice. I haven't caught anything like it since, but I still run the camera a few times a month. Just in case. I took the Subaru up to Eagles Pass that night because I needed some air. That, and I just picked up a used Canon 6D from a guy in Glenwood and wanted to test the long exposure settings. I like shooting night skies, stars over ridgelines, that kind of thing. I'm not good enough to sell them, but it's something that calms me down. No traffic, no notifications, just the shutter and the cold. I got up there a little after 9:30. The road past the Ranger Gate was still open, even though there was a little snow on the shoulders. It was clear that night. Cold, maybe in the 30s, and dry. Moon wasn't out yet, but the sky was full of stars, sharp and bright like they get at elevation. I parked at the Overlook pull-off, the one with the broken coin viewer and the bench nobody ever uses. No one else was up there. I didn't see a single set of headlights for the last 5 miles. I killed the engine, left the hazards on for a second, then turned everything off. Whole mountain went still. I set up the tripod just off the gravel facing northwest where the trees drop off and you can see the next ridge over. I've shot that spot before. It's perfect for catching Orion and Taurus coming up over the slope. The first couple shots went fine. 30-second exposures, ISO bumped up to 3200, wide open. I didn't have a remote trigger, so I was using the timer to avoid shake. I got a few good ones. Nothing fancy, but you could make out the Milky Way stretching just above the pines. I stood there flipping through them on the screen, mostly just checking focus and exposure. Then I tried a 60-second shot, just to test the noise handling. When it finished, the screen came up black. No stars, no silhouette, no error message, just black. I thought maybe I'd bumped the lens cap or the settings, but everything looked fine. I tried again, another black frame. It wasn't the battery, I checked. It was nearly full. I swapped SD cards just in case, but that didn't help either. The next 3 long exposures came out the same way. Total black. No sensor noise, no hot pixels, nothing. I crouched down and wiped the lens, checked the mount, powered the camera off and on again. It seemed to be working normally. Menus, playback, everything. I tried a regular exposure at 1/10 of a second. That came out fine. Trees, stars, everything. But the long exposures kept failing. I stood up and looked around, trying to see if maybe fog had rolled in without me noticing, or if clouds had covered the sky. But it was perfectly clear. I could see my breath, sure, but the air was still and dry. Stars were bright as ever, and quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant traffic. That's when I noticed something weird about the tree line. I'd been looking through the camera's screen so much that I hadn't really noticed it at first. But when I looked out again, just with my eyes, the ridge across from me felt off. I couldn't say why. It looked flatter than it should have, like the top edge of the trees had been drawn with a ruler. Just this perfectly straight horizontal edge, which I knew wasn't normal. That ridge is jagged. I've hiked it. There's dips and tall pines that break the line, but here it looked smooth, almost artificial. I lifted the camera and pointed toward it. One more 60-second shot. While it processed, I tried to listen for anything. Maybe some machine or a low drone hum. Nothing. Just my own breathing and the tiny tick of the shutter closing. The screen blinked on. This time, there was something there. Stars, yes, but also a row of 5 faint lights just above the tree line. Evenly spaced, small and round, almost like distant aircraft lights, but too still, too level. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't seen any lights with my eyes. I looked up again. Nothing. Just the trees and stars. But in the photo, clear as anything, there they were. I zoomed in. The lights didn't look like reflections or sensor flare. They were dim, like maybe from behind a fogged window, and had a warm white hue, not the harsh blue you get from lens artifacts. They were perfectly in line, no sag or rise, as if whatever they were on hadn't shifted at all during the full minute the shutter was open. I took another shot. The lights were gone. I stood there, just holding the camera, not even reviewing the new photo. I was suddenly aware of how alone I was up there. I didn't want to move. My chest felt tight again, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. Then I heard a sound, very soft, like a pressure change. A single low pop, almost like when you crack your ears after altitude gain. But no plane had gone over, no wind had started up, just that faint pressure shift and then silence again. I turned around and looked toward my car. It was maybe 20 feet away, sitting dark and quiet. I took a few slow steps toward it, not running, just needing to be near it. When I got to the door, I opened it, sat down, and shut it behind me. I didn't drive away right then. I just sat there, camera still in my hands, engine off, watching the tree line through the windshield. Every few minutes, I'd look down at the screen again, flip back to the one photo with the lights. It looked exactly the same each time. 5 lights. Faint, steady, steady. Nothing else around them. I don't know how long I sat there before I started the engine. Probably close to an hour. I didn't see any other cars on the way down. No animals, either. Usually you see deer near the switchbacks, or at least hear owls. When I got home, I pulled the files onto my laptop. Every photo looked normal, except that one. The metadata showed the same exposure settings as the others. No corruption, no weird timestamps. Just one 60-second frame with something in it that wasn't before or after. I didn't edit it. I didn't post it anywhere. It's still on the drive in the folder from that night, just labeled with the date. I haven't been back to Eagles Pass since. It started somewhere outside of Holbrook, Arizona, right where the 377 forks off from the 277. I was heading north, hauling a flatbed of industrial piping back up toward Farmington. Real quiet night, clear sky, desert cold, nothing but open road and the occasional tumbleweed crossing like it had somewhere to be. This stretch of highway doesn't get much traffic after midnight, especially in late November. I'd been out there maybe 45 minutes past the last gas station, hadn't seen a single car for miles, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the low hum of the engine. I was sipping from a lukewarm thermos of gas station coffee when I noticed it. A single headlight in my rearview mirror. Not close but visible. Just one light, steady and low to the ground. My first thought was a motorcycle, maybe a dirt bike with a busted beam. But even then, who's riding out here in the middle of the night? I kept glancing back as I drove. The light stayed the same distance behind me, never gaining, never fading. After about 10 minutes, I slowed down a little, not brake slamming, just eased off the gas to see if it would catch up. The headlight slowed too, same pace. Still that same gap between us. I tapped my brakes a few times. No response. Eventually, I pulled off at one of those gravel runoffs, a spot with a faded old cattle gate and a rusted no trespassing sign. Juno, my red-boned coonhound, lifted her head in the passenger seat, gave me a slow blink, and laid back down. I watched the mirror. Nothing came around the bend. I waited maybe 5 minutes. No engine noise, no light. I stepped out, let the door creak shut, and walked a few feet toward the road, listening. All I could hear was the wind pushing through the low brush and the metal ticking of my engine cooling off. I walked around to the back of the truck with my flashlight. Nothing behind me except empty blacktop disappearing into the dark. I climbed back in and drove off. Chalked it up to a trick of distance. Maybe the guy turned off somewhere. But 20 minutes later, there it was again. Same headlight, same distance. This time, I watched it more closely. It never bobbed or wavered like a motorcycle usually would. It was smooth, unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding. I flipped on my CB and asked if anyone else was nearby, but there was just static and silence. I tried again to slow down. The light stayed back. I passed a small maintenance turnout and decided to stop again. This time, I left the engine running and got out quick. The light vanished the second I hit the brakes. I ran back a bit on foot, maybe 100 yards. Juno jumped out after me, sniffing the air like she smelled something strange. Her tail was stiff, her ears up. I stood there a while. Again, no sounds, no lights. Just dry air and the buzz of power lines somewhere far off. When I walked back to the truck, I checked the road for tire marks, anything. It had rained a couple days before, so there were still patches of soft dirt at the shoulder. But there weren't any tracks, not even mine from earlier. Back in the cab, I drove on with one hand gripping the wheel a little tighter than I'd admit. I kept my eyes on the mirror for another stretch. Nothing. Then, half an hour later, near a cluster of butts, I saw it again. One light, same exact spot behind me, same height off the ground. That time I didn't stop. I just stared at it for maybe 10 minutes straight, barely blinking. Juno started whining, low and nervous. She usually doesn't react to much, but she kept glancing at the side window like she expected something to be there. I tried something different. I hit the brakes hard and killed my headlights. Pitch black. When my eyes adjusted, the headlight behind me was still there. Bright as ever. Too bright, even. It didn't cast the kind of glow it should have. Nothing lit up around it. No shine on the asphalt, no beam. Just a perfect, sharp point of white. And then it blinked out. No fade, no slow dip below the horizon. Just gone. I sat there in the dark, heart thumping in my ears. A minute passed. 2. 3. I turned the lights back on, pulled back onto the road, and kept going. No more headlight. I made it to Farmington just after 4 a.m., dropped off the trailer, signed the logbook, and went to the lot where I usually crash for a few hours before heading back. I stepped out, stretched, and looked at the sky. Above me, it was completely clear. Stars like powdered sugar scattered across black glass. And off to the east, way up high, higher than any plane I've ever seen, there was a faint white dot. It hovered for a moment. Then it shot to the left, faster than anything I've watched in my 30 years of driving. Just a blur. Then gone. Juno let out a single sharp bark, then laid down by the wheel well like nothing happened. I didn't sleep that morning. Just sat in the cab, engine idling, waiting for the sun. I never thought much about talking about this. Hell, I kept it to myself for years. But it's been sitting with me, nagging at the edges, so here it goes. I'm Ed Harrow. I'm 68 now, retired radar operator, spent most of my career at a military base in Montana, watching the skies for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing fancy, just radar screens, dials, and long shifts staring at green blips. One night, back in '94, I was on the graveyard shift, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m., working alone in the radar room. The base was mostly quiet, just the usual static and some birds or planes passing through. Nothing that ever gave me a second thought. But then something came up that didn't make sense. Around 5:15 a.m., I noticed a blip on the radar far below the altitude range we usually track. I was used to seeing planes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, commercial jets, military patrols, sometimes satellites when the gear was tuned right. This blip was at about 1,000 feet, hovering in the middle of nowhere. I figured it was a small aircraft or maybe a weather balloon. I kept watching it, expecting it to move or disappear. It didn't. Then, in less than 3 seconds, it rocketed straight up like a bullet, no curve, no slowing, past 70,000 feet. The thing vanished off the screen right around the edge of the radar's maximum range. I sat back, blinking. My heart was pounding. Nothing I'd ever seen moved like that. I tried to get a second opinion, but I was alone. I double-checked the equipment. Nothing wrong, no glitches. I logged the event in the usual way, then reported it up the chain. What happened next was what really made it strange. My supervisor called me in, calm but serious. He told me that I wasn't to mention the incident again. Not to anyone. No reports beyond the official logs. No questions. I asked why. He said it was classified and beyond my clearance. That was the first time I realized how little I knew about what was really going on. I kept the memory tucked away, didn't talk about it with my family or coworkers. You learn quick not to rock the boat in that line of work. But the weirdness didn't stop that night. About an hour later, I was outside for a smoke break. The sky was still dark, but starting to show hints of dawn. I noticed something odd, an almost imperceptible hum in the air, like a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't from the base or any machines. It felt unnatural. Then I saw a faint glow on the horizon, just above the tree line. It wasn't a star or an aircraft light. It was this pale, steady light, neither blinking nor moving fast. I watched it for a while. It didn't get brighter or dimmer, just stayed there, glowing softly. I tried to call the radar room, thinking maybe there was something new on the screens. The radio crackled, but no one answered. I went back inside. The radar showed nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as nerves, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few days, I kept catching glimpses of strange lights, sometimes hovering near the base, sometimes just off into the distance. They didn't move like planes. No sound, just there. Sometimes I'd hear the hum again, low and steady. I mentioned it once to a colleague. He laughed and said I'd been watching too many sci-fi movies. Then one night, I woke up suddenly. It was about 3 a.m., and the room was flooded with this dim bluish light. I looked out the window and saw a shape hovering just above the trees near the base. It wasn't like anything I could describe. A shape, maybe triangular, but the edges blurred and shifting. I blinked, and it was gone. I wasn't sure if I'd really seen it or if it was a dream. I didn't tell anyone. Years later, now that I'm retired and out of that world, I'm still not sure what I saw. The radar blip that shot straight up, the glowing lights, the hum, maybe some kind of new aircraft or secret tech, maybe something else. I've kept it to myself for so long because there was never a good way to explain it, but it's there. I tracked it. I know what I saw, and that's all I have. I was out on the roof again that night, just like I often am when the sky is clear. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens after midnight on a weekday. I live in a small townhouse near Asheville, North Carolina, and my rooftop gives a decent view of the stars, better than most spots around here anyway. I usually bring my little speaker up, play some low music, and just watch. It helps me unwind after long shifts at the hospital. That night, it was cool but not cold, the kind of spring evening where you can wear a light jacket and still feel comfortable. I had my black lab, Pippa, with me. She's always calm on the roof, just lying down and watching the neighborhood with those half-lidded eyes, like she's half asleep but still keeping an eye on things. I was looking east, where the sky stretched wide and dark. At first, everything was normal, the usual bright stars and the faint glow of distant planes. But then I noticed something odd, a cluster of lights that didn't seem quite right. They were small, white, and arranged in a loose pattern, like a star cluster, but they were too bright and too steady to be stars. I thought maybe it was a plane formation at first, like those military flyovers I sometimes hear about. But these weren't moving like planes. The lights started to shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it was definitely motion. Instead of drifting across the sky like an airplane or satellite, they began to rotate, turning around an invisible center. It was a slow, deliberate spiral, almost hypnotic. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Pippa lifted her head, her ears twitching. The rotation went on for a couple of minutes. The lights stayed in the same general area of the sky, but traced out this neat spiral pattern, turning as one. Then, one by one, they started to fade out. Not flicker or blink, but actually dimmed until they disappeared. The spiral shrank as the lights faded until the whole thing vanished. I remember feeling this weird mix of calm and confusion. It was so quiet up there, no sound from the lights, no jets or anything in the air, just that slow rotation and fading. I called out to Pippa softly, but she didn't move much. I wasn't sure what I'd just seen. I stayed on the roof for another half hour, hoping maybe the lights would come back or something else would happen. But nothing did, just the regular stars, steady and familiar. The next day, I mentioned it to my coworker, Nate, who's really into astronomy. He said maybe it was some kind of optical illusion or a satellite cluster, but even he admitted it sounded strange. I checked online, no reports of meteor showers or known satellite patterns that night. I thought maybe I was just tired or imagining it, but Pippa was restless that morning, more alert than usual, pacing by the door like she wanted to go out. I don't know if that means anything, but it stuck with me. A few nights later, I went back up to the roof around the same time. The sky was clear again, but I didn't see the lights. I kept watching until late, but everything looked normal. I've seen plenty of weird things at work and in life, but that slow spiral of lights just felt different. Like it was right there, just out of reach. Something real, but not quite explainable. I keep looking up now, especially on those quiet nights. Maybe I'll see it again, or maybe I won't. But that night on my rooftop with Pippa by my side, the stars didn't feel the same. We were heading back from fishing out near Lake Meredith, me, Tessa, and my cousin Wyatt. It was late, somewhere past 11, and we'd taken the old service road instead of the highway, which was probably stupid, but we were in Wyatt's truck, and he liked cutting through that stretch for the view, even though it's just brush, dirt, and wind turbines. We didn't see another car for miles, just dry, flat land and those tall white turbines spinning slow in the dark. The sky was clear, no moon, but you could see every star. It was one of those weirdly warm spring nights, like it should have been cold, but the air felt heavy and still. No wind at all. We were maybe 15 minutes from getting back to town when we saw the car. It was a gray sedan, parked half in the road and half on the shoulder, maybe 30 yards ahead. Headlights were on. Driver's door hanging wide open. Engine running, we could hear it as we got closer, Zard, this soft, uneven hum that didn't sound right. Wyatt slowed down and we just sort of stared at it. No one inside, no movement. He pulled over a few feet back from it and left his truck running. None of us got out at first. We were just quiet. Then Tessa said, "That's weird," and I remember her voice sounded flat. Not scared exactly, just off. I got out first, walked up slow, hands in my hoodie pocket. I think part of me expected someone to pop out, maybe a guy peeing in the bushes or someone changing a flat, but there weren't any bushes, and the tires were fine. I leaned in and looked around the interior, purse on the passenger seat, phone in the cup holder, keys still in the ignition. The headlights were shining out into the field beside the road, and that's when I saw it. Right where the beams hit, maybe 30 feet ahead, was a perfect circle of scorched grass, not trampled, not burned like from a fire, just blackened. Charred all the way through, but nothing around it was touched. Just this flat, round patch about the size of a backyard pool, maybe 15 feet across. Wyatt came up behind me and said, "That ain't a campfire." And he was right. There was no debris, no tire tracks near it, no sign of anything burning its way in or out. And the weirdest part, the grass wasn't flattened. It was still standing up, just dead, black and brittle like it had been cooked straight through. Tessa stayed in the truck. She rolled the window down and asked if we should call it in. I said, yeah, maybe. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the car and the patch in the same frame. But when I opened the gallery to check, it was just black. Like the lens cap had been on, even though it obviously wasn't. I tried again. Same thing, just pure black squares. Not blurry, not overexposed, just nothing. I didn't say anything right then. I just stuck the phone back in my pocket. Wyatt circled the sedan, looking for signs of damage. There weren't any. The rear passenger door had a small smear of mud on it, like someone brushed past in a hurry. That was it. The grass along the edge of the field hadn't been stepped on either. No trail, no prints. He popped his head into the driver's side and looked around. "It's in park," he said. "Full tank. Windows down in the back, no wallet." I asked if it could have been stolen and ditched. He just gave me a look like, "Stolen and ditched in the middle of nowhere with the lights on and the keys still in it?" Didn't add up. We stood there for a bit, not saying much, just listening. The air felt wrong, like it was too quiet. No bugs, no wind, just that low hum of the engine and the turbines turning way off in the distance. Then something buzzed, Wyatt's phone. He checked it and frowned. "No service," he said, and held it up like that'd change anything. I looked at mine. Same. No bars, which didn't make sense because we were close enough to the wind farm that there were usually 3 towers in range. I'd streamed YouTube in that area before. Wyatt said we should drive into town and report it. Let the sheriff's office handle it. I agreed. But then he turned to get back in the truck and froze. What the hell? I looked. Tessa was gone. Passenger door still shut, window still down. Her seat was empty. I took off running, yelled her name. No answer. I ran around the side of the truck, half expecting her to be crouched behind it messing with us. But she wasn't there. Driver's side door still shut too. The grass on the shoulder undisturbed. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds since we saw her last. She couldn't have gotten far. There was nothing to hide behind anyway, just flat land and sky and that burnt circle out in the field. Wyatt shouted and took off toward it. I followed. We got to the edge and stopped. It was cold near the patch. Not like a breeze, just colder. The air dropped 10 degrees. You could feel it in your teeth. The soil crunched under our boots like it had been through a fire, but there was no ash. Nothing drifting or smoldering. Just dry blackness. We circled the edge. No tracks in or out. No sound except our breathing. Then we heard the truck horn. We spun around, headlights flashed. Tessa was back in the truck, sitting in the front seat, eyes wide. She looked pale. Wyatt sprinted back, calling her name. I was right behind him. When we got there, she was shaking. Said she didn't remember leaving the truck. 1 second she was watching us by the sedan. The next, she was sitting in the seat, alone. She swore she hadn't moved. But her boots were dusty like she'd been walking through the field, and there was a smudge of soot on the back of her jacket. We didn't ask more questions. We just left. We drove straight to the sheriff's office and reported the car, gave the location, told them it looked abandoned, left out the rest. Next morning, we called to follow up. The deputy said they'd found the vehicle, but nothing unusual. Just a stalled sedan, engine cold, no sign of the owner. Towed it to impound. No mention of the scorched grass. No report of the door being open. I asked if they found a purse or phone inside. They said no. Clean interior. Nothing of note. I checked my phone again later that day. The pictures I'd taken were gone. Not even black squares anymore. Just missing. Like they never existed. The only trace was a blank spot in my camera roll where the thumbnails skipped a few seconds. We didn't talk about it again after that. Not really. Tessa won't go near that part of the county anymore. Wyatt sold the truck a few months later, claimed it had electrical issues, but I never saw any. I still think about that car. The way the engine sounded like it was straining. The way the grass was just dead in a perfect circle. I don't have a word for what we saw. All I know is we weren't supposed to be there. I was camping alone off an old Forest Service road just west of Bend, Oregon. This was late October, right before the snow really starts to stick. I'd gone out for a quick overnight, just needed to get out of town and clear my head. Nothing crazy, just a simple setup. One-man tent, sleeping pad, a jet boil, and my dog Nellie. She's a red heeler mix. Smart, a little neurotic, but a good trail dog. I'd rescued her from a shelter in Klamath Falls a couple years earlier, and she's been my go-to companion ever since. She sleeps light too, which I always appreciated out in the woods. Anyway, we parked just off a spur road that'd been chewed up by logging trucks and hadn't been graded in years. Hiked in, maybe a mile and a half to a clearing I'd been to once before. A flat patch near a shallow creek, surrounded by lodgepole pine and some younger firs. There was no cell service out there, which I liked. Just the sound of the wind and the occasional squirrel freaking out. I set up camp around 5 p.m. just as the lights started to go. It had been a gray, damp day, cold, but not freezing. The kind of weather that settles in your bones if you stop moving for too long. I made a small fire, cooked a pack of ramen, and gave Nellie some kibble. She wandered the edge of the clearing while I ate, nose to the ground, tail up. Around 7:30, it was already getting dark, so I packed out the fire and climbed into the tent. I had my Garmin watch on, just a basic GPS tracking model I used for trail runs and hikes. I always sleep with it on when I'm out alone. Not for any particular reason, just habit. Sometimes I'll check my heart rate or altitude in the morning. That night, I remember checking the battery before I went to sleep, 71%. I didn't set an alarm. I woke up once around 2 a.m. because Nellie growled. Not a full bark, just a low, deep-throated warning. I sat up, unzipped the sleeping bag, and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no branches breaking, no distant engines, just wind moving through the trees. I put a hand on Nellie's back and she stayed rigid for a minute, then laid back down. I figured maybe a deer or a raccoon had wandered close. That wasn't unusual. I didn't really fall back asleep after that. I dozed on and off, mostly listening. Nothing else happened. It was one of those long nights where the dark feels like it stretches on forever. I didn't hear Nellie make another sound. When the sky finally started to lighten around 6:45, I got out of the tent, stretched, and fired up the jet boil for coffee. Nellie trotted a little circle around the clearing, sniffed the air, then sat near the tent and stared into the trees. Not unusual, just watchful. It wasn't until I sat down with the coffee that I remembered to check the watch. I pulled it up like I always do, just curiosity, seeing what my sleep heart rate looked like. But when I toggled to the GPS history, I saw something weird. A track had been logged between 1:58 a.m. and 2:44 a.m. It was labeled walk, which was already odd because I hadn't moved from the tent. The start time lined up almost exactly with when Nellie had growled. The GPS path showed a near-perfect circle. It looped around my tent about 15 feet out, a smooth, uninterrupted line, no erratic jumps, no doubling back. It completed 4 laps, then stopped. Total distance, 0.57 miles. Duration, 46 minutes. Average pace, 20 minutes per mile. It made no sense. I sat there for a long time, staring at the little red trail on the screen. I thought maybe I'd rolled over in my sleep and somehow triggered the motion sensor, but the shape was too clean, too even, and I never left the tent. I was awake for most of that time, I was sure of it. I looked around the clearing for footprints. The soil was soft, damp in spots. I expected to see something, my own prints from the day before, Nellie's paw marks, but nothing fresh. No sign of someone or something circling us. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was a glitch, that maybe the watch picked up a false signal. But then I looked at Nellie again. She hadn't moved from her spot. She was still staring into the trees. Not tense, not afraid, just locked in, watching. I packed up fast. Coffee half drunk, tent still damp. I didn't even bother rolling the sleeping bag properly, just stuffed it in the sack and clipped it to my pack. Nellie stuck close the whole time, which wasn't like her. Normally she'd wander as I packed, but that morning she didn't go more than a few feet from me. We hiked out quick. I kept glancing back toward the clearing, even though I couldn't see it anymore. Every crack of a branch made me twitch. When we got back to the car, I sat there for a while before starting it. Turned the watch off completely. I didn't delete the track, but I haven't opened it again either. It's still in the history, labeled walk. I haven't been back to that spot since. It happened 3 winters ago on a Tuesday night. I was living alone at the time, renting a house on the outskirts of Butte, Montana, close enough to town for work, but far enough that you could walk into your backyard and not see another porch light. The place backed up to some old Forest Service land, mostly pine and rock. Quiet. I liked it that way. I was working nights back then, doing snowplow contracts for the city. Shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until the roads were clear, usually sometime around dawn. That particular night, though, they'd canceled the rotation because the storm we were expecting never hit. Roads stayed dry, so I had the night off. I stayed in, made a frozen pizza, fed my dog, Buster, a mutt that looked a golden retriever mixed with something scrappier. I watched half a hockey game, then turned in early. I remember checking my phone one last time before I plugged it in and set it on the nightstand. No missed calls, no messages. Just 10:43 p.m. and that little lightning bolt icon showing it was charging. I woke up once, sometime around 2 a.m., because Buster growled. Not loud, just a low, rumbling grumble from his bed at the foot of mine. He didn't bark or stand up. He just growled like he smelled something off. I told him to knock it off half asleep and rolled over. Figured he heard a deer out near the tree line. The next morning, I got up around 7, took Buster out for a quick walk, then made coffee. I noticed my phone had a voicemail notification, which was weird because the signal at my house was pretty spotty and I usually didn't get missed calls unless I drove back into town. But sure enough, there it was, one new voicemail. No missed call attached to it, no number listed, just unknown. I listened to it on speaker while standing in the kitchen holding my mug. It was 45 seconds long. The first part was just this low humming noise, real deep, like when you're near high voltage lines or a big transformer, that steady, low frequency vibration. But underneath it, there was this soft, grainy static, like a bad radio station. No voices at first, no clicks, just hum and static. About 30 seconds in, I heard it. My name. Whispered, not once. Plain as day. Connor. Pause. Connor. Same voice both times. Male. Quiet but clear, not emotional, not threatening. Just saying my name like they were checking to see if I was listening. Then nothing. Just the hum fading out into silence. I played it again. Same thing. No distortion, no skips. The voicemail hadn't glitched. It was just like that. I checked the timestamp. 2:13 a.m. That's when I remembered Buster growling. I looked around, kind of half expecting to find something wrong in the house. But everything was normal. Doors locked, no windows open, no footprints outside but mine and Buster's. I deleted the voicemail. I don't know why. It just felt wrong to have it saved. I figured it had to be some kind of prank, maybe a spoofed number. But the fact that there was no call record at all, just the voicemail, bothered me. I checked my call log, even went online to my phone account later that day. Nothing logged for 2:13 a.m. That night, I stayed up later than usual, watching dumb TV with the volume too high. Buster stayed near me more than normal, which he only did when it stormed or something spooked him. Around midnight, he went to the sliding door and stared out into the yard for a full 5 minutes, ears up, body stiff. But he didn't bark. I got up and looked too. Nothing out there, just snow and dark and trees. 2 nights later, I got another voicemail. Same number, unknown, same time of night, 2:09 a.m. This one was shorter, only about 20 seconds, mostly static this time with these weird distant clicks, like tapping on glass. Then, near the end, something like breathing, just one long, slow inhale. That's it. No voice, no name. I didn't delete that one right away. I kept it for a few hours, played it 3 or 4 times like I was trying to hear something more in it. I even held the phone to Buster to see if he'd react. He did. As soon as the static started, his ears flattened and he walked out of the room. I deleted it before bed. That weekend, I drove up to Missoula to stay with my sister for a couple nights. I told her work had been slow and I wanted a change of scenery. But really, I just didn't want to be at the house alone. I didn't get any voicemails while I was there. My phone stayed quiet. When I got back, I walked the property again. Nothing out of place, no tracks, no signs of anyone messing around. My landlord lived 2 hours away and never came out unless something broke, and I didn't know anyone close enough to think they'd be messing with me. The last thing happened maybe a week later. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I was sitting in the living room, lights low, just kind of scrolling through nothing on my phone. Buster was asleep on the rug. Everything was quiet. Then the humming started, but not from the phone. It was outside, low, steady, pulsing, like it was coming from above the house, but not loud enough to rattle anything. Just barely audible. I stood up and listened. It wasn't the heater or the fridge. It wasn't the power lines. It was deeper, and it didn't seem to echo. I slid the back door open and stepped onto the deck. The sky was clear, stars everywhere, cold air, no wind. I stood there barefoot, straining to hear. The hum just stopped. No fade out, no Doppler, just gone. I looked up and realized the stars above the tree line were gone. Not behind clouds, just missing. There was this patch of sky, maybe the size of my outstretched hand, where nothing showed, just flat black. I blinked and squinted and waited, and after maybe 10 seconds, the stars came back. Not all at once, one by one, like something had moved. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much for a while after. No more voicemails came through. I changed my number anyway. I kept Buster close. I stayed out of the woods. I never reported anything because there wasn't anything to report. Just a couple recordings and a sky that went blank for a few seconds. I still don't know who or what said my name.